Welcome back, my family. Before we dive into tonight's creepy little journey, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who loves a good scare before bed. I would love to know where you are watching from and what time it is for you right now. So drop it down in the comments and hype me up a little on YouTube. Now, get comfortable, dim the lights, and let us step into tonight's story.
I used to think ghost stories were about houses, roads, or some old picture in a thrift store. Mine is about a video file. Right now, as I'm recording this, my phone is on the coffee table in front of me, screen face down, gallery app still open in the background. A few minutes ago, I was just scrolling like everyone does at the end of the day. Screenshots, receipts, my nephew's birthday, a blurry picture of my car in a Kroger parking lot. Then my thumb stopped. There it was again. A 15-second clip from a place I have not set foot in for over 10 years. The same crooked headstones, the same dead grass, the same tree at the end of that tiny cemetery off a county road outside Columbus, Ohio. I have deleted this video more times than I can count. I deleted it from my camera roll. I emptied the recently deleted folder. I switched phones, switched brands, switched cloud services. It keeps coming back. I told myself it was just some backup glitch, a sync error, a weird, boring explanation I could live with. Then a few nights ago, my phone did something new. I opened the clip out of pure morbid curiosity, watched my 22-year-old self walking through that graveyard, the camera shaking slightly in my hand, the darkness swallowing the edges of the frame. I watched her again, the woman in the white dress that none of us could see in real life, only through the screen. When it ended, I swiped down, ready to close it, and my gallery app quietly slid up a little gray bar at the bottom. Suggested tags, faces it had recognized. Under the video in small, polite letters, it labeled her as a new contact. The scariest part wasn't seeing her in the graveyard. It was seeing my gallery app quietly tag her face as someone you may know. 1.1. Present-day apartment, present-day problem. I am not recording this for views. I am not trying to start some creepypasta chain or make a name for myself on the internet. I am just a 30-something guy in Columbus, Ohio, who has run out of ways to pretend this is normal. Right now, I am sitting in my little second-floor apartment off Broad Street. If you were here, it would probably feel aggressively average. Beige walls, cheap laminate floors, a sagging gray couch, facing a TV that is always a little too bright. The blinds are half closed, letting in slats of streetlight from the parking lot. Every few minutes, a car passes below headlights, sliding along the ceiling like slow-moving ghosts. The soundtrack of my nights is always the same. The faint murmur of whatever Netflix show I leave running, the soft whoosh of the HVAC kicking on and off, the low, steady hum of the fridge in the kitchen. There is a siren about every hour, an ambulance or a cop car yelling its way somewhere else. The building settles, sometimes a random pop in the wall or a creak in the ceiling from the neighbor upstairs. Most nights, all that noise is weirdly comforting. It means the world is still turning. People are still cooking microwave dinners and scrolling their phones and arguing over nothing in the unit next door. Tonight, though, the TV is off. My dinner is cold on the coffee table, and I have my phone in my hand like it is something alive and unpredictable. I am writing to a horror channel because I do not know what else to do. Not to the police, not to a priest, not to a therapist. To you. To someone who I guess has heard enough of these stories to know if I am losing it. When I was in my early 20s, I thought ghost stuff was funny. I was that idiot who would suggest driving out to the creepy house outside town at 2 a.m. or wandering into a graveyard with a cheap flashlight and a six-pack. I laughed at people who said they felt a presence, I rolled my eyes at every real ghost caught on camera video, paused it, and pointed out all the ways it could have been faked. I do not laugh at that kind of thing anymore. In the Photos app on my phone, there is a 15-second clip that should not exist. It has followed me through 4 phones, 3 cloud backups, a switch from iPhone to Android, and back again, and even 1 full factory reset where I wiped everything down to the settings. Every time I think I have finally gotten rid of it, it turns up somewhere else. It is like scrolling through your old pictures and finding a stranger sitting in the back of your family photos. You delete it, you swear you deleted it, and then a month later, it is back tagged as "on this day," like a cheerful little reminder. The clip itself does not look like much if you scrub through it too fast. The thumbnail is boring, a dark, grainy frame of a small cemetery. You can see the corner of a headstone in the foreground, and way in the back, a tree that leans slightly to the left. The video was shot on an old iPhone 4 in that washed-out, noisy way those cameras had in low light. If you did not know what you were looking for, you would think it was just a drunk kid filming nothing. But I know what I am looking for. I know exactly what is hiding in those 15 seconds. Usually the clip reappears in one of 3 places. Sometimes it is in imports, even on a phone I never imported anything to. Sometimes it jumps to the top of recently added, as if I had just taken it that day. Once it showed up in a little auto-made collection called "On This Day," alongside a completely harmless photo of my lunch from 3 years ago. That one almost made me throw my phone at the wall. When I tap the thumbnail and it opens, something in the apartment always changes. It is subtle, but I feel it every time. The fridge hum dips down a notch, like someone turned the volume down on it. The air vent above the hallway sighs once and then quiets. The constant background hiss of traffic on Broad Street seems to sink underwater, muffled and far away. Sometimes I do not even hit play. Sometimes I just open the details screen and stare at the small print, the date, the time, the location tag. October more than 10 years ago. Late at night. A road I do not drive down anymore, even when it would be faster to get somewhere. When I do hit play, the 15 seconds stretch longer than they should. I watch my younger, stupider self walk through that cemetery, the camera shaking just enough to make me a little nauseous. I hear my own voice from another life, trying to act tough, laughing too loud, filling the silence with jokes, because that is what you do when you feel small. I always stop it before the end. I have seen the last few seconds enough times to have them burned into the backs of my eyes. I do not need to watch her head lift again. I do not need to watch her move in a way that does not match the world the camera is supposed to be recording. Half of what I feel about that video is stupid, simple embarrassment. I was young, drunk, obnoxious. In the clip, you can hear the slur in my words. You can see the way my hand jerks the phone around, like I am trying to impress someone who is not even there. There is a part of me that cringes at the thought of anyone seeing it at all, even if there was nothing else in it. The other half is fear. Not the fun kind you get from a movie, not jump in your seat fear. A slower, heavier fear that sits in your chest. The kind you feel when you think you might have actually broken something that cannot be fixed. I am scared that if I send this clip to someone, they will say it is fake, that they will run it through some filter and point out the pixels and compression artifacts and tell me how easy it would be to edit something like that. I am more scared of the other possibility that I show it to someone and they do not say any of that. They just go quiet and keep watching. They lean closer to the screen. Their face changes, but they do not tell me what they see. Then they hand my phone back, and for the rest of the night, they avoid looking at me. There is one more thing you should know before I tell you about the cemetery, and what we saw there, and how we were stupid enough to think we could walk away from it like it was just another story. The phone that recorded that video should be dead. Not just powered off, not sitting in a drawer somewhere. Dead. It was an iPhone 4 with a spiderweb crack across the screen and a battery that barely lasted an hour. A few months after that night, it slipped out of my pocket in the kitchen and hit the tile just right. The screen went black. When I tried to turn it on, all it would do was flash the Apple logo over and over until it heated up like a hand warmer. I took it to one of those mall kiosks where guys in hoodies replace screens under fluorescent lights. The kid there looked at it for 2 minutes, shrugged, and told me the logic board was fried. He offered me $50 for it for parts. I took the cash and watched him toss it into a plastic bin with a dozen other ruined phones. That phone is gone. It has been gone for years. And yet right now, sitting in my living room on a brand new phone I bought this spring, I can open my Photos app, scroll down, and tap on a 15-second clip with a timestamp from over a decade ago and a location tag for a forgotten strip of county road. And watch the cemetery through the dead eyes of that camera like it never left me. 1.2. Who I was back then. If you had met me at 22, you probably would not have guessed I would end up being the guy writing to a horror channel about a video that will not leave him alone. Back then, my world was a cheap 2-bedroom apartment off Georgeville Road that always smelled faintly like cigarette smoke and pizza grease, even though we technically were not allowed to smoke inside. The carpets were that permanent gray-brown color apartments get when 100 pairs of shoes have lived and died on them. The walls were off-white patched, where someone before us had punched a hole, and maintenance had smeared over it with joint compound. We were on the 3rd floor, just high enough that carrying cases of beer up the stairs felt like a workout. Our balcony looked out over the parking lot and the back of a strip mall with a dollar store and a vape shop. At night, the orange glow from the sodium lights turned the parked cars into low, sleeping animals. My roommate Jake loved that place. He said it felt temporary in a good way, like a backstage area for a life that had not started yet. Jake was one of those people who seemed permanently turned up a little louder than everyone else. He laughed at his own jokes, talked with his hands, and had this way of leaning in when he was about to say something stupid or dangerous, like he was inviting you into the punchline. His hair was always a little too long, pushed back under a backwards cap half the time. His closet was basically band t-shirts, ripped jeans, and hoodies he'd picked out of Goodwill bins because they had a story. That was the thing about Jake, he was obsessed with stories. Not books, not movies, moments, nights. We can't just sit here, he would tell me around midnight on a Friday. We need something to remember this by. And his definition of something usually meant somewhere we probably were not supposed to be. He had a list, unspoken but real, of places he had dragged us to because they were creepy or interesting. An abandoned farmhouse out past the city limits where the floor sagged and raccoons had taken over the attic. A half-finished strip mall project that died when the funding fell through skeletons of storefronts covered in graffiti and weeds. A closed-down diner with the signs still up, windows dark, but the faded lettering of the daily specials still clinging to a board inside. He would find these spots the way some people find new restaurants. Rumors, half-remembered directions from a guy at work, a glimpse of something weird from the passenger seat of someone else's car. Jake had a talent for sensing where the edges of ordinary life thinned out, where the buildings were a little too quiet, and the lights flickered one time too many. Then there was Ryan. If Jake was the gas pedal, Ryan was the hand hovering anxiously over the brake. He was the one who actually understood his car insurance policy, the one who brought a flashlight that worked instead of draining his phone battery for ambience. The one who would look up property records and half-heartedly mumble about trespassing laws while he drove us to whatever spot Jake had found on some late-night form or county map. Ryan barely drank. He would nurse one beer all night while Jake and I went through the rest of the six-pack. He was quieter, sharper, with a dry sarcasm that could cut Jake's theatrics right in half when he wanted to. He always had some complaint: ready gas prices, the smell in the car, the fact that we were wasting his Saturday by creeping around in the dark like teenagers. And yet he came. Every time. He would sigh, call us idiots, and still show up with his keys and his hoodie zipped all the way up, ready to be the adult in the room when things inevitably got weird. If you lined the three of us up, I sat somewhere in the blurry middle. I was not as reckless as Jake. I did not have that itch. He had the need to poke every boundary just to see what happened. But I was not as cautious as Ryan either. I liked the feeling of being next to people braver than me. I liked saying yes and then pretending my heart was not in my throat when we cut across a dark field or squeezed through a broken fence. Mostly, I liked the illusion we all quietly agreed on, that nothing truly bad could happen to us. We were young. We had car keys and smartphones and gas station coffee and parents who thought we were just out with friends. Bad things happened to other people in other towns in the kind of news stories you scroll past. Not to three guys in a Civic with a trunk full of empty Mountain Dew bottles and a playlist full of metal. Our weekends fell into a routine that felt at the time like freedom. Friday afternoon, get off work, drive back down I-270, windows cracked, even if it was freezing music just loud enough to drown out whatever was stuck in my head from the week. Pull into the apartment complex, circle 3 times, looking for a decent parking spot, give up, and take one by the dumpster. Walk up those 3 flights of stairs that always smelled faintly like pot and laundry detergent. By 7 or 8, there would be a stack of greasy cardboard pizza boxes on the kitchen counter, the cheap kind from the closest place still open. Jake would show up at the door or crash out of his room if he had already been home holding a plastic grocery bag full of whatever beer was on sale. Ryan would text, "I'll drive if you morons are drinking." We would argue over music, finally settle on something loud and angry and let the building shake a little. Then, somewhere between the second and third beer, Jake would lean back on the couch, stare at the ceiling, and say something like, "Okay, what are we doing tonight?" It is strange to think how simple that question used to be. It could mean going to a house party, driving out to some lookout point, wandering a Walmart at 2 in the morning, just to watch the other insomniacs push their carts around. Or it could mean, as it did, that night turning off Georgeville Road and driving toward a small, forgotten cemetery on a strip of county road that never seemed to lead anywhere good. Now sitting in this different apartment, older and more worn down, I realize how far away that person feels. The kid who thought being scared for a few minutes in the dark was a thrill you could sprint away from and leave behind. The kid who thought any story could be over as soon as you got back in the car and shut the doors. I do not talk to Jake anymore. There was no huge fight, no dramatic falling out. Life just kept happening. He moved to another side of town, then to another city for a job he said he hated, but paid better. His texts got shorter, then less frequent. The last time I saw him in person, it was years after everything, and he would not meet my eyes for more than a second at a time. Ryan got married. He has kids now. A house with a yard somewhere 2 states away. I see pictures sometimes when they float up in my feed, him standing in front of a grill, holding a spatula, smiling in that tight way guys do when someone says, "Say cheese," and they were not ready. If you met him now and asked about his 20s, I do not know if he would even think to tell you about that cemetery. The 3 of us have not been in the same room since that night. Not once. It is like whatever we stepped into out there made sure our lives unfolded along different lines afterward, never quite crossing in the same way again. When I try to remember the last time we all sat in that old living room together, I always land on a very specific moment. The 3 of us hunched over my phone, The room lit mostly by the screen, the world outside our windows black and indifferent. The video had just finished playing for the first time. Jake was the one who had insisted we watch it. He was the one who leaned in first, his bravado evaporating frame by frame as he realized what we were actually looking at. He was the one whose hand shook when he told me to rewind it. The one who cracked a joke afterward that did not land because we were all too busy listening to the silence. And he was the one who called me a week later, his voice lower and rougher than usual, no laughter anywhere in it. I remember standing in my kitchen, the cheap overhead light buzzing, staring at the dirty dishes in the sink while I held the phone to my ear and listened to him breathe for a few seconds before he spoke. "If you keep it," he said without even saying hello, "it's not going to just be a story." At the time, I thought he meant guilt, trauma, the kind of thing you tell yourself when you are trying to forget a bad night. I told him not to be dramatic, that it was just a video on an old phone. Now, years later, with that same 15-second clip sitting quietly in the gallery of a device that never touched that graveyard, I am starting to think he meant something else. 1.3. The cemetery on County Road 19. The place itself is not impressive. That is part of what makes it worse. It is not one of those sprawling, manicured cemeteries with marble angels and paved roads and tasteful lampposts. The cemetery on County Road 19 is the opposite, small, almost easy to miss if you are not looking for it. Like a bad thought tucked into the corner of a room. If you drive west out of Columbus toward Galloway and keep going past where the subdivisions thin out, the stores get scarcer, and the lights turn from white LEDs to older orange lamps, you eventually hit that stretch of two-lane road. No sidewalk, no shoulder worth mentioning. Just cracked asphalt, a ditch on either side, and wide empty fields that seem to soak up sound instead of reflecting it. On the right side, if you are heading out of the city, there is a rusted metal sign half swallowed by a scraggly hedge. The paint on the sign has peeled and flaked off so many times that you can only really make out the first word. Hill Cemetery. The rest is either gone or hidden under a layer of moss and bird droppings. Beneath the sign, a short iron fence runs in a crooked line, follow the curve of the ground style, not even high enough to keep a determined kid from stepping over. There is no formal gate, just an opening where the fence sags down with two posts that lean slightly inward toward each other like tired shoulders. A single rusted chain hangs between those posts most of the time, looped lazily around one and hooked onto the other. It has never looked particularly secure to me even back then. It was the kind of barrier you could undo with one hand and about 30 seconds of effort. When I was a kid, my parents used to take this road as a shortcut to avoid highway traffic. It shaved maybe 5 minutes off the trip, but my dad liked it because there were fewer cops and more trees. I learned to recognize when we were getting close to the cemetery by the way the fields started to close in, the way the tree line crept up closer to the road. I always pressed my face to the window when we passed. In my memory, that glass is cold, smearing my breath as I exhaled. I remember the first time I noticed the headstones' rows of tilting dark shapes that seemed to huddle together. Some were small and square, some taller and narrow. A few leaned so far, I wondered why they had not fallen yet. They were just there, right off the road, like someone had forgotten to tuck them away somewhere more private. My mom must have seen me staring because she told me without taking her eyes off the road. "That's the old soldiers' cemetery." I asked her what that meant, but she just shrugged and said something about Civil War probably, and how they don't really bury people there anymore. She said it in that casual adult way that means on some level she did not actually know. I never checked to see if it was true. Still, the old soldiers' cemetery stuck in my head. It made the place feel heavier, like the air over that patch of ground was thicker than anywhere else on County Road 19. If you pulled over, and once I was older and had a license, I did, you could see the layout more clearly. Inside the fence, a narrow gravel loop cut a lazy oval around the interior. It was barely wide enough for one car. Grass had started to reclaim parts of it, thin green blades poking through the stones. A few tire tracks had left pale lines, but even those looked faded, like no one had driven all the way in for a long time. The night we went, that loop was only an idea under a layer of darkness and dead leaves. The chain was pulled across the entrance, hooked tight, the padlock hanging from it, like an ornament. If we had wanted to do it the right way, we would have parked somewhere else and walked in on foot. We did not do it the right way. From the overgrown gravel, the graves marched in uneven rows down a slight slope. There was no strict order. Some stones were closer together, some spaced further apart, like families trying to cluster in death the way they had in life. The ground between them was mottled with tufts of grass and bare patches where the earth looked bruised. Behind that last row of headstones, where the grass thinned out, there was a narrow line of trees. Not a full-blown forest, just a scrim of trunks and branches that separated the cemetery from whatever field lay beyond. In daylight, you could see between the branches and catch glimpses of open land, maybe a wire fence. At night, it was just black. Not the deep blue of an open sky, but a real, heavy, ink-dark black that began at the ground and climbed. To the right of the cemetery, as you faced in, from the road sat an old building that looked like it had been dragged out of someone's bad dream. Once it had been a funeral home. You could still see the faint outline of its name above the empty doorway, the letters warped and flanked by peeling paint. The front steps were cracked, one corner sagging, and both of the big front windows were covered on the inside by film grime dust, maybe thick plastic that had yellowed over time. The porch light fixture hung crookedly over the door glass, shattered out long ago. No lights ever shone there, not when I was a kid, not when we went that night. No cars parked in its weed-choked drive. No sign in the yard. It was just there, a dead service next to a dead field of stone. There were rumors, of course. Places like that attract them the way porch lights attract moths. Jake was the one who collected the stories about County Road 19. He had a way of doing it without admitting he cared. He would bring them up like random trivia while we sat on the balcony or passed a bottle back and forth. Some kids from Westland said they saw candles in there last Halloween, he told us one night, nodding his chin toward the west, even though the cemetery was miles away. Like a whole row of them in front of the old funeral home. Said they thought it was some kind of ritual until the lights went out all at once. A different time, he claimed someone from his job had driven by and seen a figure standing at the chain gate after midnight, just standing there, not flagging anyone down, not moving, just watching cars go by. Teenagers said it was haunted. Older folks, the few who would even acknowledge it, mostly just shook their heads and called it disrespectful to go bothering the dead. No one had a clear legend, no woman in white backstory, no tragic car accident narrative. It was all half sentences. You know, they, followed by a shrug. They say it's not right out there after dark. That uneasy, we don't go there feeling hung around the cemetery like fog even in daylight. At night, driving past, the sound always changed a little. If you kept your windows down, you could hear the highway off in the distance, a soft, constant rush punctuated by the occasional heavy drone of a big rig. Closer, the wind moved through the bare trees lining the road, whistling when it hit them just right, hissing when it dragged through dry grass. Every so often, a lone car would pass the other way, its tires roaring and fading its lights, briefly painting the interior of your own car silver. But right as you came alongside the cemetery, there was a pocket, a dip, a subtle drop in everything. The highway hush seemed to step back. The wind's voice faded. Even the sound of your own engine felt dampened. like someone had pressed their hands over your ears for a second, then let go. The first few times I noticed it, I told myself I was imagining things. The grade of the road, maybe, or the way the trees broke the wind differently. Something technical and boring. But even now, if I close my eyes, I can remember the way that silence felt. The way it forced you to be aware of your own breathing. Your fingers on the steering wheel, the sudden urge to check the rearview mirror without knowing why. Later, after everything, when I finally forced myself to stop treating the clip like a cursed object and started poking at it like a file I dug into the metadata. I do not know why I thought that would help. Some part of me was hoping I would find something obviously wrong with it, some bug or corrupted tag that would explain why it kept showing up. I expected to see location unknown or no data, something blank. Instead, there was a tiny, precise little pin stuck on a map. Not just County Road 19 near Galloway, not just the stretch of road with the sign. The pin dropped almost exactly where I had been standing when I filmed it, between two headstones near the far end of the cemetery, just a few steps from the thin line of trees. Zooming in on that little digital satellite view, seeing the pale shape of the gravel loop and the darker smudge of the funeral home roof beside it, did something strange to me. It made that night feel both more real and further away, like seeing an autopsy photo of your own memory. I could go back there any day. I could get in my car tomorrow, drive out past the city, turn onto County Road 19, and pull over at that same patch of dirt by the ditch. I could duck under the chain walk between the same stones, stand on the same patch of ground, where my younger self lifted his phone and pointed it into the dark. I just have not. And after you hear what happened when we did it the first time, you will understand why. 2.1. The drive out. It was one of those late October Fridays where the air outside the windows feels like it has already decided it is November. The kind of night where every breath has just a hint of cold in it, but not enough to make you put on a real coat. We had the sliding glass door cracked open a few inches to let some of that air in the screen buzzing gently every time the wind nudged it. On our coffee table there was a spread that could have been a stock photo for bachelor failure. A cardboard pizza box collapsed slightly in the middle under the weight of congealed cheese. Half a dozen beer bottles stood in a jagged cluster, labels peeling where the condensation had collected and dried. There were crumpled napkins, a remote wedged between cushions, and one lonely slice of pizza with a black bubble of burnt crust no one wanted. The TV was on, but muted. Some Halloween horror marathon was running on cable, grainy slashers and dimly lit haunted houses flashing silently across the screen. A girl was screaming in total silence, her mouth a wide white O, while the closed captions calmly spelled out, "Screams." On the kitchen counter, my phone sat propped up against a roll of paper towels, Bluetooth speaker connected, pushing out a steady low wall of metal. Not the aggressive, focused kind, just the background noise we used when we did not feel like talking. The kind with double bass rumble and guitars that sounded like a drill, but somehow smoothed out into wallpaper if you let it. Jake was on the floor, sitting cross-legged on the cheap rug, leaning back on his hands. He had his head tipped back, watching the TV upside down. Ryan was on the end of the couch, closest to the balcony, one foot bouncing the bottle in his hand, still mostly full. I was in the middle of the couch, picking at the crust of a slice I was not really hungry for, feeling the slow, pleasant heaviness of 3 beers in my system. I remember thinking in a lazy, detached way that this was enough. That if the night ended with us just dozing off to muted horror movies and waking up stiff on the couch, it would be fine. Jake, of course, had other plans. He lifted his head just enough to look at us, eyes a little glassy but sharp. So he said, drawing out the word like he was introducing a magic trick, "Are we really just gonna sit here and watch other people be idiots in horror movies all night?" Ryan took a sip of his beer and made a non-committal noise. "I work tomorrow," he said. "I'm not doing a 3 a.m. Waffle House run or whatever bullshit you're about to propose." Jake snorted. "Relax, Dad. I'm not talking about Waffle House." He rolled to his knees, crawled over to the coffee table, and dug his phone out from under a greasy napkin. Whipping it upright, he thumbed at the screen, scrolling, then turned it toward us with a grin. "You know what this is?" he asked. The photo on his screen was dark and blurry, but I recognized it. The rusted cemetery sign, the leaning fence, the empty black beyond. "County Road 19, I said. "Bingo!" Jake sat back on his heels, triumphant. "So here's my thought. We go out there, take a few pictures, maybe shoot a quick video, put it on the band page. New track dropping, soon recorded live from a haunted cemetery. That kind of thing. Instant engagement." Ryan rolled his eyes so hard I could hear it. "You want me to drive your drunk ass out to the middle of nowhere so you can take edgy pictures in a graveyard?" Jake pointed at him. "I want you to drive your drunk friends, plural, out to a very historic military burial ground to honor our fallen heroes with tasteful content." "That's worse," Ryan said flatly. I laughed because it was easier than saying no. "Come on," I said, nudging Ryan's leg with my foot. "You've driven us to worse places. That's not the argument you think it is," he muttered. But he put his bottle down on the table, empty or close to it, and stretched his shoulders like he was already resigning himself to the idea. Jake saw the shift and went in for the kill. "We won't stay long. In and out. 10 minutes tops. You can be back in bed before 1. Ryan gave him a look that said very clearly that he doubted that. He let out a long breath and then stood up anyway. "If we get pulled over," he said, pointing at Jake, "you are explaining to the cop why we smell like a brewery and we're covered in grass stains." Jake grinned. "Deal." 15 minutes later, we were in Ryan's Civic, the apartment lights behind us, the TV still silently flickering through another stranger's nightmare. The Civic was old even then. The cloth seats were worn smooth and shiny in places from years of passengers sliding in and out. The floor mats were permanently embedded with crumbs and bits of gravel. The dashboard lights glowed a tired green, the kind that looked like they belonged in a car one generation older than everyone inside it. The interior smelled like fast food air freshener and a faint underlying hint of something like wet dog that no one could ever quite identify. There was a fast food bag tucked down between the passenger seat and the center console with 2 cold fries permanently fused to the bottom. Loose change rattled in the cup holders whenever we went over a bump. I took the front passenger seat out of habit more than choice. Jake sprawled in the back boots up on the hump in the middle, one leg braced against the back of my seat. Ryan adjusted the side mirrors with the same care every time, even though we only ever drove the same few routes. The radio was on, but low-tuned to a station that alternated between classic rock and whatever heavier stuff they thought would keep late-night drivers awake. A guitar solo wove through the hum of the engine, the sound slightly tinny through the Civic's aging speakers. As we pulled out of the parking lot, the world outside shifted from the orange wash of the apartment lights to the harsher glare of the main road. We passed the gas station on the corner, lights buzzing, an attendant in a hoodie leaning on the counter, a single truck at the pump. A Waffle House floated by on the right, its big yellow sign glowing like a beacon for the insomniacs and the drunk. "Last chance for smothered and covered," I said, pointing lazily. "Don't tempt me," Ryan replied. "We get this over with, maybe." We turned off onto smaller roads, the lanes narrowing, the streetlights thinning out until there were long stretches of darkness broken only by the Civic's own beams. Jake leaned forward between the seats, his breath warm with beer. "You know, they say there's a hitchhiker that walks this road, right?" he said, voice pitched in that campfire story tone he loved. Civil War nurse. Lost her unit. Flags down cars in the fog. If you stop, she gets in and never leaves. Ryan snorted. You realize the last Civil War nurse has been dead for like 150 years, right? That's the point, genius, Jake said, smacking the back of his seat lightly. She's still on call. Cool, Ryan said. If I see anyone in the road, I'm speeding up. I watched the world scroll by outside my window, darkened strip malls, rows of houses with one or two lit windows, like eyes staying open late. The deeper we got, the more the landscape opened up. The houses replaced by long shadows of distant barns' fields, sleeping under a thin skin of moonlight. The road surface changed gradually from smooth to patched and pitted. Every so often, the Civic would thump over a dip, making the glove compartment rattle. The radio kept up a quiet commentary, songs blending together into a single guitar-driven pulse. We passed a closed-down car wash its metal bays empty and echoing. A billboard loomed up out of the dark, advertising a personal injury lawyer, the smiling face on it weirdly bright in the headlights, before it slipped away behind us. Somewhere off to the left, unseen, a freight train blew its horn, a long, low wail that floated over the fields and then sank. Inside the car, the mood stayed light, loud, stupid. Jake kept throwing out bits of horror trivia, quizzing us on which movie had the kids in the graveyard scene, which urban legend started with 3 guys in a car. Ryan pretended not to know and got most of them right anyway. I chimed in when I felt like it, letting their voices and the radio wrap around each other. I remember laughing at something Jake said about ghost hitchhikers not bothering with broke guys in a Civic. I remember the way the overhead light reflected faintly in the windshield, a pale circular smudge above the dashboard. I also remember exactly when the sound changed. We had just turned onto County Road 19. The sign for it flashed in the headlights and vanished behind us. The houses were gone now. No more gas stations, no more fast food. Just the dark on both sides and the narrow twin beams of our headlights cutting down the middle. The radio was playing some older metal track drums, ticking like a metronome, a low vocal growl under it. Ryan had one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the shifter. Jake was in mid-sentence, something about how soldiers' cemeteries had to be haunted by Union rules when the music stuttered. It did not fade. It did not cut to silence and back. There was a half second where the guitar note seemed to stretch thin like taffy. Then everything snapped into a brief, sharp burst of static. It was the kind of sound that makes your teeth hurt for no good reason. High and low all at once. Underneath it, for the shortest fraction of a second, I heard something that was not static at all. It could have been my name. It could have been a word. It could have been just the shape of a voice without enough time to form anything real. Then the song came back exactly where it would have been if nothing had happened. Ryan's hand twitched on the wheel. Jake stopped talking mid-joke. What the hell was that? I asked, half laughing. Because that is what you do when something tiny but wrong happens, and you do not want to give it weight. Station's garbage out here, Ryan said, but his voice had that tightness in it just for a second. Jake leaned forward, squinting at the display. Dude, that wasn't the station. That sounded like interference, Ryan cut in. Like you two breathing beer fumes directly into the speakers. We let it go. We changed the subject. Jake made a crack about us getting possessed by a DJ. Ryan turned the volume down a notch anyway. It was such a small thing. If everything else had not happened, if we had gone taken a couple of blurry pictures, freaked ourselves out a little, and driven home laughing, I probably would not remember that flicker on the radio at all. But we did not. And I do. We were less than 5 minutes from the cemetery when it happened. I remember the timing too clearly now to be comfortable about it. 2.2, hopping the fence. We knew we were getting close before the GPS did. The darkness outside the windshield changed in a way that is hard to explain if you have never driven out of a city and into fields at night. The scattered house lights disappeared. The road stopped reflecting the glow of anything except our own headlamps. The sky seemed to drop a little lower, the stars brighter and meaner. Then the rusted cemetery sign floated up in the beams. The Civic's headlights swept across it in a slow, pale arc, catching the flaking white paint on the letters, the streaks of rust running down from the bolts. The iron fence showed itself next, just a few thin bars rising out of the ditch and tracing the edge of the property in a crooked line. Behind it, rows of dark shapes stepped away into the night. Ryan eased off the gas. The car rolled past the sign tires, hissing softly on the worn asphalt. There was no shoulder to pull onto, no convenient gravel lot, nothing marked visitor parking. Just empty road, black ditch, and the fence. "Where am I supposed to put this thing?" he muttered. Across the street, Jake said, pointing at a patch of bare dirt opposite the cemetery, where trucks had apparently turned around enough times to kill the grass. Perfectly legal, totally safe, absolutely not how every horror movie starts. Ryan sighed, but he swung the Civic over anyway, nose angled slightly toward the ditch. He put it in park, pulled the handbrake, and shut off the engine. The silence that followed the death of the engine was so complete at first that my ears rang. For a second there was nothing. No music, no motor, no heater fan. Just the faint ticking of the cooling engine and the sound of our own breath. Then the night rushed in all at once. Crickets. The constant small static noise of insects layered over each other in every direction. The wind moving through the dry weeds in the ditch in a whispering hush. Somewhere far off, down where the road bent toward the highway, the low, continuous roar of distant traffic like surf. It made the quiet around us feel even thinner, like a sheet you could tear with a fingertip. We opened our doors almost in unison. The dome light flicked on, pale and weak, turning the interior of the Civic into a little lit-up aquarium in the dark. Cold air slipped in, muddied with the smell of exhaust and damp earth. My shoes hit the ground with a crunch of gravel. The dirt under the loose stones was softer than I expected, the soles sinking just enough to feel unsteady. The cold came up through it, through my socks, a creeping ache in my toes. Across the road, the cemetery sat, wading the fence, throwing thin shadows back toward us. Up close, the iron looked even more tired, paint, long gone metal, gone rough and pitted with rust. I could smell it from where I stood, that particular metallic tang, like old coins and blood diluted 1,000 times. Jake came around the back of the car, shoving his hands into his hoodie pocket. He pulled out a small black mag light and shook it once, then clicked it on. A tight white beam cut across the road, landing on the gap in the fence like a spotlight. "Showtime," he said. I fished my phone out of my pocket and woke it up. The lock screen showed 12:18 a.m. I swiped open the flashlight and added my own cone of light to the mix. Ryan did the same a second later, more out of practicality than enthusiasm. The road between us and the cemetery looked wider now that we were standing at its edge instead of passing over it. It was empty in both directions. No headlights, no taillights. Just twin lines of paint stretching into the dark. "Let's go before a cop rolls by and asks why we're loitering in the middle of nowhere," Ryan said. We crossed quickly, the 3 circles of light bobbing and overlapping on the faded yellow center line. It was only a few seconds, but I remember feeling oddly exposed, like something could come tearing out of the darkness and catch us mid-stride. Nothing did. At the fence line, the ground rose up a little, the ditch giving way to a strip of hard-packed soil. The iron posts were sunk into concrete that had cracked and shifted over time. The bars between them were bent in places, one of them twisted enough that it had a permanent lean like it was trying to escape. The chain at the entrance sagged between two posts, looped twice around one, and locked with a padlock that did not look like it had been disturbed in years. Jake reached out and tapped it with one finger. The metal-on-metal sound was shockingly loud, a hard, bright clink in the dark. "Dude," Ryan hissed. "You trying to wake up the county?" Jake just smirked and hopped up, swinging one leg over the fence. It was barely 3 feet tall. He balanced on the rail for a second, then dropped down on the other side with a soft thump. He flicked his flashlight around in a lazy circle, the beam catching a nearby headstone, then the edge of another. I followed. My jeans scraped the top bar as I swung my leg over. For a split second, my weight was balanced on one foot on the rail, the other dangling over uneven ground, my hand gripping cold iron that left a brief damp streak on my palm. Then I dropped, landing a little awkwardly on the soft earth. Ryan came last, muttering under his breath about broken ankles and emergency rooms, but he still climbed over. For a moment, we stood there just inside the line of the fence. 3 men in a small wedge of light, with darkness pressing in on all sides. The ground inside the cemetery felt different. It was not just softer, it was uneven in a way that suggested things under the surface. My foot dipped slightly where the earth had sunk, then rose again where roots ran. Some of the headstones leaned at odd angles, as if whatever held them straight had shifted long ago, and no one had bothered to fix them. A few stones were intact, and upright names and dates still legible. Others were worn smooth inscriptions, erased by time and weather. Every direction I turned there were low, dark shapes. Gravestones, some barely more than nubs rising out of the grass. Taller markers with rounded tops. A flat slab here and there, half buried under moss and dead leaves. Behind all of it, the line of trees loomed, their branches knitted together to form a jagged silhouette against the cloudy night sky. Being surrounded by those shapes did something strange to my sense of space. It felt like the world had shrunk down to the arc of my flashlight and the narrow beams from the others. Beyond that, there might as well have been nothing. "Okay, this is officially creepier in person," Ryan said quietly. "Dude, it's fine," Jake said, already moving forward between the graves. "It's just rock gardens with names." He drifted from stone to stone, reading out names and dates in a mocking funeral director voice. "Beloved father," he intoned. "Beloved wife, beloved. Guy who lived to be 43 and got a rock for it." I followed a few steps behind my light, playing over the worn edges of the stones. Here and there, a plastic flower lay collapsed in the grass, its color leached away by sun and rain. A small American flag flapped weakly beside one grave, its stick half out of the ground. We wandered like that for a while, aimless, our voices bouncing around the empty air. Jake did a ghost impression at one point, throwing his arms up and making a long, drawn-out woo sound that made even him laugh at himself. Ryan shook his head and muttered something about how stupid we would look if anyone drove by and saw us. At one cluster of older stones, I stopped and leaned down, squinting at a date. 1903. The death date was a century-old fact, but standing there in the dark, it felt freshly carved. "Hey," Jake called. "Check this out." He had picked a stone near the center of the cemetery, taller than most, with a little decorative arch at the top. He stood behind it, only his head and shoulders visible, hands out to the sides like a game show host presenting a prize. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said in his best horror movie trailer voice, "coming to you live from the Old Soldiers Cemetery, it's me, still alive and very spooky." "Idiot," Ryan said, but there was a smile in his voice. "Hang on," I said. "Stay there." I flicked my phone from flashlight mode to camera. The screen glowed brighter for a second, adjusting, and then the viewfinder showed me Jake's face looming over the top of the headstone, eyes, wide mouth, twisted into an exaggerated grimace. The rest of him was swallowed by the dark. "Give me your best haunted look," I said, angling the phone to get some of the other graves in the frame. Jake obliged instantly. He rolled his eyes back, let his jaw slacken, tilted his head at an unnatural angle. The beam from his mag light hit the underside of his face, casting deep shadows under his cheekbones and making his teeth look too sharp. He groaned theatrically. I hit record, just a quick, stupid video, 10 seconds of Jake hamming it up in a graveyard. My focus was on him, on holding the phone steady, on framing the shot so that the stone's name sat just below his chin. My vision tunneled down to that little rectangle of light. I did not notice what moved behind him. Not then. Later, when I was back in some different apartment with better walls and worse sleep, when I plugged my phone into my laptop and slowed that clip down frame by frame, I would see it. Far in the background, beyond Jake, beyond the stone, he was pretending to haunt. Between two smaller markers, half lost in the shadows, something passed through the edge of the frame. Not close enough to see clearly, not bold enough to be obvious. Just a darker shape moving against the dark, a suggestion of white where there should not have been any. A flicker there and gone in less than a second. In the moment, all I heard was Jake's fake moan, Ryan's exaggerated sigh, my own soft laugh under it. The cemetery around us stayed still. The air felt the same. The insects kept up their static chorus. The trees did not shiver. Until later, that tiny, easy-to-miss movement was just background. Until later, we were still in the part of the night where nothing truly bad had happened yet. 2.3. The first weird things. It did not turn all at once. There was no moment where the wind roared and the sky split and an ominous chord started playing. It was more like someone slowly reaching over and turning the dimmer switch down, click by almost imperceptible click. After the stupid haunted headstone bit, the energy between us loosened. The adrenaline from sneaking in had cooled into a kind of restless wandering. There were more graves to look at, more names to mispronounce. The night felt like it still had time to kill. Ryan peeled off first. "I'm gonna stay closer to the fence," he said, hitching his thumb toward the road. "If some farmer calls the cops, I'd rather be within sprinting distance of the car." "Aw, come on," Jake said. "You afraid of the actual dead people or just the living ones with badges, SM?" Ryan answered deadpan. He lifted his light toward us for a second. The beam washed over Jake's face, then mine, before he turned and started making his way back toward the outer rows. Jake shook his head and grinned. "He's gonna be the first one to die in the movie. The cautious, sensible guy always gets it bad." "Then maybe don't make it a movie," I said. But I was still walking with him deeper between the stones. We drifted toward the older part of the cemetery, where the stones were shorter, more worn, and more crowded together. The dirt seemed lumpier here, the grass patchier. Some markers had toppled over, completely lying flat and half swallowed by the earth. Above us, the sky was a smudged, hazy gray. Whatever stars might have been out were smeared behind a layer of high cloud. The moon was up there somewhere, but hidden, its light diffused into a weak, directionless wash that barely brightened the air. It was not the crisp kind of cold night where everything feels sharp. It was the heavy kind where the air seems to hang off your shoulders. The smell was different too. Away from the road and the faint stink of exhaust, the scent of wet leaves took over. It was the dense, slightly sour smell you get in October when things have fallen and sat and started to soften. Every step I took in the grass made a soft, sticky sound, like walking over a floor someone had mopped badly and left damp. My phone's flashlight cut a narrow tunnel through it all. The beam picked out blades of grass, clumps of dirt, the pale faces of stones rising up at the edge of its reach. Beyond that circle of white, the world fell off quickly into murk. For a little while, we kept up the chatter. Jake pointed out funny last names. I read dates aloud. 1901, 1887. A child who had not made it to their third birthday. It was easy to let it all blur into a kind of historical scenery. Then, without any one thing changing, I noticed the sound. It was not that it went away. It just rearranged itself. Jake was behind me by a step or two, close enough that if I stopped short, he would have walked into me. I could hear him clearly. His breathing a little louder from hopping between stones, a faint wheeze on the exhale he always claimed was nothing. The shush of his jeans brushing together. The occasional scuff of his boot when he hit a rock or a hidden root. Ryan, though, might as well have been on the other side of a closed door. He was not that far, maybe 20 or 30 yards away, still within the wide circle of the cemetery. I could see his flashlight bobbing occasionally between the rows closer to the fence, a faint moving star of light. But his footsteps, his muttered commentary, that all sounded thin, distant, like he had walked not just away from us, but into a different layer of the night. At the same time, the background noise from the road seemed to have been turned down. I knew the highway was still on the other side of those fields. I knew cars were still moving along Broad and the other arteries of the city. But the familiar low roar had pulled back like a tide. I could hear it if I concentrated, but it no longer sat under everything the way it had in the car. Somewhere out beyond the trees, a dog barked. Just once. A sharp, clipped sound, more question than warning. It cut through the air, hung there for a heartbeat, and then stopped. No follow-up barks, no answering dog. The silence that folded in after it felt not unnatural exactly. Just too quick, like someone had hit mute before the sound was done finishing itself. I told myself I was being dramatic, that walking around a place full of dead names in the dark will make anybody's senses act weird. But I could feel the skin on the back of my neck tightening, that old animal reaction to being in a place where your brain cannot predict what the next noise will be. I checked my phone out of habit, thumb sliding down from the top to glance at the battery. 40%, I thought. Plenty, I thought. Except the number staring back at me was 20. I frowned, tilted the screen to make sure I was reading it right. 20%. The tiny bar was a lot closer to red than I wanted it to be. Did your phone just tank? I asked over my shoulder. What Jake said. Battery. I swear I was at 40 a few minutes ago. Now it says 20. He shrugged, the movement just a shadow in the corner of my eye. Cold kills it faster. Or ghosts. Or you playing Candy Crush all day, man. I don't even have. I started, then cut myself off. It did not matter. The number was what it was. I'm at like 60, he added. Maybe your phone knows you're a coward. Yeah, I said. That's it. Still, I felt a little twist in my gut as I hit the home button and swiped over to the camera. For a second, the screen went black. Not the normal quick flicker of an app opening longer. A sluggish blank, like the phone was thinking about it. Then the camera view popped up, my flashlight beam automatically dimming down as the sensors adjusted. For half a heartbeat, the screen showed me nothing but gray grain. Then the image snapped into focus, shouldered stones, crooked ground, the faint line of trees. I told myself the lag was nothing. A glitch. An old phone pushed a little too far. Still, it felt like standing in front of a person and watching them hesitate before answering a question they should not have to think about. Behind us, closer to the fence, Ryan's voice floated over. Is it just me, he called? Or is it colder in here than it was by the car? It should have sounded normal. The distance was not that great. but his words came to me strangely. It was like someone had hung a sheet of plastic between us, thin enough to see through, thick enough to muffle. The edges of his sentences blurred into each other, consonants softening. I could not hear the little breaths between words that you normally do when someone speaks loudly outdoors. Jake shouted back something stupid about ghosts cranking the AC, his voice clear and sharp, every syllable riding the air like a stone skipping on a pond. Ryan's reply was swallowed, the shape of it there, but dulled. Maybe we just got used to the car, I muttered more to myself than anyone. We kept walking. My flashlight passed over an area where the stones were smaller, more tightly packed. A cluster of markers no higher than my knee, children, probably, though I could not read most of the names. Some of the faces of the stones were chipped. One had an old toy car parked beside it, half buried in mud. The urge to talk died down. Our shoes made the same soft, damp sound in the grass. My breath puffed in visible little bursts that disappeared almost immediately. I felt a prickle along my left arm, like someone had run a cold fingertip from my wrist toward my elbow. I stopped, rubbed at the spot through my jacket, tried not to look as jumpy as I felt. What Jake asked, footsteps slowing behind me. Nothing, I said. Thought there was a spider or something. He snorted. We're in a field of forgotten bones and you're scared of spiders. Spiders actually exist, I said. That's the difference. Up ahead, something pale caught the edge of my beam. I shifted the flashlight, and the shape resolved into a small stone angel perched on a pedestal no bigger than a mailbox. Its features were worn almost smooth, but you could still make out the suggestion of a face wings folded against its back. Someone had laid a plastic flower at its feet years ago. Its petals were curled and gray. For reasons I could not have articulated, if you had paid me, I felt drawn to it. Maybe it was just that it was different from all the rectangles and arches. Maybe it was the way it sat there small and alone at the edge of its little patch of ground. I lifted my phone, letting the flashlight ride just below the camera, and slowly panned across the angel, wanting to get a clear shot of it. The glass eyes of my phone reflected a tiny, warped version of the statue back at me. That was when I heard it. My name. Soft. Too soft to carry the way a normal voice would. It was not a shout, not even really a call. More like someone saying it under their breath at my shoulder, the way you would if you were trying to get my attention without anyone else noticing. It came from just behind me and to the right, close enough that the hair on the back of my neck rose before I even fully processed the sound. I spun around so fast, my light smeared a bright streak across the ground. For a split second, the beam cut across empty air, then landed square on Jake. He stood there with his hands stuffed deep into his jacket pockets, shoulders hunched against the cold eyebrows, climbing in surprise at my sudden movement. What he said. I stared at him, flashlight steady, now heart pounding in my ears. "Did you just say my name?" I asked. He frowned. "No, I was about to say we should." He stopped, swallowed, then shook his head. "No, I didn't." There was enough truth in his face to make my stomach drop. Behind him, the darkness between the stones looked deeper than it had a moment ago. 3.1. Pointing the camera at the dark. If the night had any sense of mercy, that is where it would have stopped. A few weird feelings, a couple of odd sounds, and then we would have gotten bored and left. Instead, Jake decided it was time to turn it into content. "Dude," he said, stepping up beside me after the whole whisper, "that wasn't incident." "Okay, new plan. You need to do like a full creepy walkthrough. One take, Blair Witch, but with better cheekbones." I snorted, more grateful than I wanted to admit for the break in tension. "Yeah, because the world needs my drunk cemetery tour right now." "I'm serious," he said. "Put it on the band page. Live from the old soldier's graveyard. You know that would get like triple the views." He was grinning, eyes bright in the flashlight glow, but there was a little edge to it. Like part of him really believed that turning this place into a joke, into a video, would make it smaller somehow. Manageable. "Come on," he said, nudging my arm. "Continuous shot. No cuts. Those always look more legit." "Fine," I said. "But if we capture some demon and it follows us home, I'm tagging you in the credits." I flipped my phone up in my hand thumb, smearing a little dampness from my palm across the glass. The battery icon still sat on that uncomfortable 20%. I tried not to think about it. I swiped from flashlight to camera, then to video. The familiar red circle glowed at the bottom of the screen. The world shrank down to the frame. I hit record and lifted the phone to chest height, angling it slightly downward just enough to catch my feet and the ground when I looked later. The flashlight sat just above the lens, throwing its narrow beam out into the dark. Everything beyond that cone was swallowed. "Okay," I said in my best mock-serious announcer voice. "This is, October whatever 20-something and we are currently trespassing." "Not trespassing," Jake interrupted from off to my left. "We are peacefully existing near some very understanding dead people." "Fine," I said. "We are peacefully existing in the old soldiers' cemetery for the enjoyment of absolutely no one." As I spoke, the camera rolled. On the little screen, the graves on either side of the narrow path looked taller than they had in person. My phone exaggerated their height, the way cheap lenses do in low light, pulling them closer, stretching them upward. Names and dates flashed by in white rectangles as my beam slid over them: 1879, 1904, 1912. Some stones were so worn that the letters had turned into faint, unreadable grooves. I narrated nonsense as we walked, partly for the video, partly to keep my own nerves from seizing up. "Here we see an example of questionable life choices," I said, panning left, to catch Jake making a face at the camera. "Subject appears to be very dumb, possibly possessed by Pabst Blue Ribbon." He lunged into frame, baring his teeth. "Tell my story," he said in a ridiculous growl. I turned the camera back down the path, letting his voice slide into the audio background. Far ahead, the silhouette of the larger tree loomed, its branches spreading out like a black umbrella. Behind it, I could just make out the faint, jagged edge of the woods, a darker darkness against the night sky. Our footsteps came through loud on the recording. I know that now because I have listened to them more times than I care to admit. The crunch and crush of dead grass, the occasional snap of a twig, the scrape of my shoe on stone. They sounded closer together on the video, more rhythmic, like someone had tightened the beat. Underneath all of that lower but constant, there was the highway. That distant hush, like a huge, slow breath that never quite finished. It felt weirdly comforting at the time, proof that beyond this small pocket of forgotten ground, life was still moving. People were still driving home, still chasing the glow of fast food signs, still existing in fluorescent lit spaces that did not feel like the inside of a closed mouth. As I kept filming, though, something in that soundscape shifted. The wind, which had been tugging gently at the branches and hissing through the grass, eased off. Not into dead stillness, exactly. More like it backed away a few steps and watched. The leaves that had been whispering overhead settled. Even the crickets seemed to adjust their volume, dropping a notch like someone had turned down a slider labeled outside noise. My own voice echoing back at me from the phone sounded wrong in a way I could not quite articulate. Flatter, less space around it. When I said something dumb into the night, the words seemed to fall straight down instead of drifting out. On the recording, it is even more obvious, the microphone compressing the sound, shaving off the edges. It is like listening to someone talk under a blanket. We moved forward. I remember aiming the camera deliberately at the tree ahead, thinking that it would make a nice, dramatic endpoint. a big, ominous silhouette to close the video on. The flashlight beam carved out a narrow path straight toward it, the trunk resolving in shaky white as we approached. And up ahead, I murmured into the phone, dropping my voice to that fake TV host whisper is the reason Ryan is currently regretting his life choices. Already was Ryan called weakly from somewhere behind us, his voice distant and muffled again. The path curved slightly, forcing me to pivot my wrist. I panned right to follow it, wanting to get a shot of the tree from an angle with more of the graves in frame. The screen blurred for a second as the camera adjusted, then sharpened. That was when it happened. Just for a heartbeat near the line where the darker strip of woods met the lighter gray of the open cemetery, the phone showed me something that my brain did not bother to file properly at the time. A pale vertical blur. It sat there at the edge of the frame near the base of the tree, too tall and narrow to be a stone too bright against the murk, to be just a trick of the light. It was the color of a dress that has been washed too many times, washed out white, more suggestion than fabric. It did not have detail yet, not really. More like the idea of something standing there not quite finished. Then my hand kept moving, the beam swung further, and it slid out of view. I did not stop. I did not gasp. I did not even consciously see it, not in the way that makes you react. If you had been beside me watching over my shoulder in that exact moment, and you were not looking directly at the screen, you might not have seen it either. It was there for less than a second, halfway between frames. A hiccup of form. What my eyes did register was the tree now fully back in the center of the frame. I zoomed in slightly, making the trunk fill the shot bark etched in stark high contrast. The flashlight washed out some of the detail, brightening the roughness into a flat plane of gray. The woods behind it were a dark smear, and there, I said, trying to keep my voice mock casual, we have the legendary haunted tree, where absolutely no one has ever done anything remotely weird, and I am definitely lying. Jake laughed. It came out a little forced, but it was sound, and sound felt necessary. I turned the camera back toward myself for a second, flipping it briefly to front-facing without stopping the recording. The screen showed my own face overly lit from below by the flashlight, every pore and blemish exaggerated. My eyes looked a little too wide, my pupils too big. If this ends up on the news, I said into the lens, just know that it was Jake's idea, and I wanted to go to Waffle House. Somewhere beyond the edge of the light, a branch creaked. A dry, slow sound, not quite whined, not quite wait. I flinched so slightly that the camera only tremored a little. Okay, I said quickly, turning it back around, catching one last sweep of the graves. We're gonna go before we get arrested, or eaten, or both. As I started to lower the phone, still recording, the audio track picked up one last odd artifact right at the tail end of my bravado. You would not notice it on a casual listen. At normal volume on the first playback that night, it just sounded like a little extra static. A slight rise and fall under my words as I made my final joke into the dark. Years later, with headphones pressing into my ears, and the world outside my apartment held at a low murmur, I dragged the playback bar back and forth over those last 2 seconds and really listened. Under my voice, under the gravelly, nervous humor in it, there is something else. A breath. Not mine. Not Jake's or Ryan's. It is too soft, too slow. A drawn-in inhale close to the microphone, like someone leaning in just past my shoulder. It rides over the top of my words, then fades as the clip cuts off. 3, 2, the second sighting. When she looks up, if you watch the clips back to back, it almost looks deliberate. Like there was a first knock and I ignored it, so something decided to knock harder. In the moment, it did not feel that structured. It just felt like wandering in the dark with two people who were still mostly treating this like a joke, and one brain mine that was slowly failing at pretending it was fun. After that first continuous walkthrough, the energy between us scattered again. Jake and Ryan migrated toward a row of taller military-style headstones near the center of the cemetery, identical shapes lined up in straight, sober rows. Even in the low light, you could see the uniformity, the neatness that someone had cared enough to impose on that little patch. I heard Jake say something about the army of the undead, and Ryan snapped back with, "Please don't piss off the veterans," their voices overlapping and fading as I drifted away from them. I do not remember making the choice to walk toward the big tree. I just looked up and realized my feet were already heading in that direction. It sat at the far end of the graveyard, where the ground sloped down just enough to make each step feel a little less certain. The tree's branches spread wide fingers splayed against the hazy sky. In the half-light, it looked like it was leaning slightly over the stones, as if listening. The air felt heavier there. Not colder exactly, but thicker. Like the difference between breathing in a small room and breathing in a crowded one, even though I knew we were still outside and the only bodies were buried. Behind the tree, the line of woods was a darker smudge, a jagged edge where the world ended. No light came from beyond it. No distant porch lamps, no shine from a farmhouse window. Just that wall of black. I slowed as I approached my flashlight beam, dropping instinctively lower, closer to my feet. The more distance there was between me and the other two, the less I wanted to announce myself to the whole field of stones. My phone buzzed once in my hand, a tiny vibration that made my fingers jump. For a second, I thought it was a notification, but when I glanced down, the only thing on the screen was the time and the little camera icon waiting. I thumbed it open again. The battery was at 18% now. It felt like watching sand run through a tiny glowing hourglass. The first video was still sitting there, a fresh little rectangle in my camera roll. I tapped past it, switched straight to the camera, then to video. This time I did not bother with the performative tone. No fake announcer voice, no jokes. I hit record and let the flashlight sit lower on the frame so there was more darkness for the lens to chew on. On the screen, the ground rolled toward me in grainy gray blades of grass and fallen leaves smearing together into an indistinct texture. As I lifted my arm slightly, the beam caught the base of the big tree, the rough bark glowing pale under the harsh light. I could see two crooked stones near it, leaning away from each other like they had argued and never made up. "You're good," I called over my shoulder, not loud, more reflex than anything. Just getting the tree. I do not know if either of them answered. If they did, their voices did not stick in my memory. The world inside the phone became more important than the one around me. I started to pan. Slowly, I let my wrist turn, sweeping the flashlight and the camera in one smooth arc from left to right. The beam slid over the trunk, the first row of stones, the open patch of grass in front of the tree. For a breath, there was nothing but shapes and shadow. Then she was just there. There was no fade in, no ghostly shimmer, no glitch in the pixels. One frame there was empty space near the base of the tree. The next, the middle of the screen, held a figure where there had been none. She was standing a little off-center, facing toward the camera. At first, my brain tried to file her away as another grave marker. A tall, pale slab, a trick of my own flashlight. But the longer I looked, even over the course of a single second, the less that worked. She was the shape of a woman. That is the best way I can describe it. Not in a soft, romantic way, in an anatomical, undeniable way. The slight slope of shoulders under fabric, the faint suggestion of a throat above a collar, the width of hips narrowed by the curtain of something white. She wore a long gown the way you might imagine an old-fashioned nightgown, or the kind of hospital gown they used before everything became disposable. It fell straight down from her shoulders, no visible seams or buttons, just a single drape of dull white that stopped a little above the ground. Her hair hung forward in a tangled curtain gray, not from age but from darkness, and the way the camera caught it. It obscured most of her face, long strands clumped together, some stopping at her chest, some trailing in front of her shoulders. Her arms were close against her sides, hands hidden in the folds of the gown. She did not hunch. She did not sway. She stood with a kind of rigid stillness that made the rest of the world look jittery. On the screen, everything around her fuzzed a little. The grass at her feet was a smear. The tree trunk behind her wavered. But she was sharp in the way low-resolution things can be sharp, defined, contrasted, a solid piece cut out from a softer background. The sound dropped again. It is obvious now when I listen back. The highway hum that had been whispering under everything simply disappears at the moment she appears in the frame. No fade, no gentle lowering. 1 second it is there. The next it is gone like someone closed a door. The wind, what little there had been, went with it. The microphone stopped catching the rustle of leaves, the subtle hiss of distant air. All that remained on the audio track was a faint electric hiss. The sound of the phone itself working. The sound of empty channels. In that dead pocket, my voice did not come. For once, I was quiet. Because I froze. I stopped walking. My feet planted themselves without asking. All my attention funneled down into my hands, into the too bright little rectangle that had suddenly become the only world that mattered. I watched the video as it recorded in real time, seeing her without any buffer of disbelief. There she was. Not a blur this time. Not a half-seen streak. Her whole form standing at a distance that made no sense for something we had not noticed with our own eyes. My heart slammed once hard enough that I saw the phone tremble. The movement translated to the recording as a slight jittery shake, a stutter in the frame where the world lurched and then recentered. "Jake," I said, or tried to. On the recording, my voice comes out smaller, thinner, almost swallowed before it hits the mic. The space where her face should have been was the part my mind kept skidding away from. Even now, I cannot draw it for you. I cannot tell you her eye color or the shape of her mouth. The camera did not capture crisp features. It captured something worse, the impression of a face with the suggestion of two darker hollows, where eyes might be, and a vague shadow where a mouth should sit. I have seen enough low-light footage in my life to know that faces go weird on camera. Noses vanish. Eyes become dark pits. Teeth become bright smears. It is easy to blame that. But the certainty I felt in that moment did not care about exposure or pixelation. I knew she was looking directly at me. There was something about the way her head was angled, the line from her shoulders to that curtain of hair. Even through the broken resolution and grain, the force of that attention landed on me like weight. I felt it in my chest, in the clench of my throat, in the sudden awareness of how alone I was in that exact spot. In the video and in the memory that hangs over it like a second layer, she does something slow, deliberate, and absolutely wrong. She moves, not her whole body. There is no dramatic step forward, no outstretched arm. It is confined to her neck, her head. She starts with her chin lowered, the hair hiding most of what could be seen. Then, over the course of a few frames, slower than you expect, almost lagging behind itself, her head lifts. It is not a clean, smooth motion. It is a kind of stuttering rise, like a puppet whose strings are being pulled one at a time. Chin up a fraction, pause. Up again, pause. Until whatever counts as her gaze is level with the camera. Those dark hints of eyes tilt up in my direction. My arms locked. Everything in me screamed to either run or drop the phone, but all I did was stand there and stare back at an image of someone who was not standing in front of me. Because here is the worst part. I did the stupidest, most human thing. I broke eye contact with the screen. Instinct told me to verify, to check, to prove that what I was seeing was some trick reflection shadow, the ghost of my own fear imposing itself on pixels. My eyes tore away from the phone and snapped up to the actual world in front of me. The tree was there, the crooked stones, the patch of dead grass at their feet, the smudge of black woods beyond. No woman, no white gown, no curtain of hair. No figure standing perfectly still in that space. The emptiness hit me harder than if something had been there. It was like stepping off the last stair in the dark and finding no floor where you know there should be one. I stood there, phone still held out in front of me, the camera still rolling, the flashlight beam still pointed dead ahead. My skin crawled. My mind flailed for some explanation that would allow both realities to be true. Behind me, somewhere back among the more orderly lines of headstones, Jake said something. I did not catch the words. His voice reached me muffled like it was coming through a vent. I looked back down. On the screen, nothing had changed. She was still there, centered in the frame, her head now fully raised. Those knot eyes still locked in the exact place my face would be if the world inside the phone and the one I was standing in lined up properly. I watched rooted as the video continued to capture a version of that patch of ground that did not match what my own eyes were seeing. It was like I was holding a window into a slightly different cemetery, one where she existed and I was the intruder. I remember this clearly. My hands started to shake so badly that the image of her flickered at the edges. Not enough to blur her out, just enough to make it look like the world around her was vibrating while she remained perfectly, impossibly still. 3-3. All three of us see her. I do not know how long I stood there staring back and forth between the empty air in front of me and the not empty version of it inside my phone. Time felt thin, stretched, like the skin on a drum about to split. At some point, my voice remembered how to work. Jake, I called, and even to my own ears, it sounded wrong, too high, too tight. Ryan, come here, just look at this. From where they were among the straighter rows, I heard Jake laugh. Oh no, he said. He's doing a selfie monologue. I'm not participating in your found footage career, dude. Seriously, I said. The word came out sharper than I meant it to. Just come here. Something in my tone must have finally cut through whatever bravado he was still clinging to. I heard their footsteps start moving toward me, the grass giving way under their shoes. Ryan's flashlight beam bobbed into view first, then Jake's, both cones of light jittering as they picked their way between the stones. When they reached me, we formed a kind of crooked triangle near the big tree. Jake took up a spot to my left, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. Ryan hovered a half step behind my right side, his light pointed mostly at the ground. The night felt heavier with all three of us in one place, like our combined heat had nowhere to go. The only light around us came from my phone and Jake's flashlight angled down and across the frame. Everything else was bare, open darkness. All right, Jake said, trying for his usual swagger and not quite landing it. What did you catch a raccoon doing a ritual or something? Just watch, I said. My hands were shaking, but I managed to tap the tiny square at the bottom of the screen, calling up the last clip. The recording still sat there, thumbnail a smear of gray and black. I pressed play. On the screen, the world rewound and then started again. The footage began with the ground, the beam of my light dragging across grass and stones. My own breathing came through a little louder than I remembered a soft rush in the mic. I heard myself say, barely audible, "You're good just getting the tree." Then the camera in the recording began to pan. I could feel the others leaning in. Jake's shoulder brushed mine. Ryan's breath warmed the side of my neck for a second before the cold swallowed it again. All three of us watched as the frame swung toward the tree. Empty grass, trunk, crooked stones, and then her. The woman-shaped figure appeared in the middle distance just as she had the first time. The white of her gown glowed faintly against the dark. Her hair fell like a curtain over her face. Her arms hung motionless at her sides. Seeing it alone had been one thing. Watching it as part of a group, feeling their bodies lock up beside mine, made it worse. What the Jake started, but the word died halfway out of his mouth. The sound of the world on the recording bled away again, highways and wind dropping into that same flat hiss. In the silence around us, I realized my real surroundings had gone quieter too. The insects had eased off. The leaves in the trees above us held still. On screen, my younger self stopped moving, and the tiny shake of the camera betrayed how hard my heart had slammed. We watched her head begin that jerky ascent, chin lifting in strange, staggered increments. Little patches of her face slid out from behind the hair, not enough to show features, just enough to prove there was something underneath. I felt the air around us cool, a thin, clammy layer laying itself across my skin, the kind of cold that does not start at your fingers or toes, but somewhere under your ribs. Ryan did not say anything. Not a joke, not a rationalization. His silence was its own answer. On the screen, her head rose until those dark hollows pointed straight at us. Straight at the camera. Straight at the three idiots huddled together in front of a tree we had no business approaching. And there, past me said on the recording voice, small and nervous, "We have the legendary haunted tree." The clip ended there. I had stopped it the first time I watched out of pure instinct. The image froze on the last frame, her at full attention, the ghost of a face angled toward where my eyes had been. I thumbed the pause icon and let the screen hold that still for a second. No one spoke. I could feel Jake's whole body tense beside me. The bullshit evaporated off him like steam. He swallowed hard enough that I heard it, a soft click in his throat. "What filter is that?" he asked finally, but there was no energy behind it. It was the kind of question you ask because your mouth is used to moving. "There is no filter," I said. "Maybe it's Ryan," began, then stopped. "Glitch. Some kind of artifact. You see those videos online where the camera..." "She moved," I said. I did not mean to cut him off, but I did. Her head moved. That doesn't look like..." I trailed off. There was no simple end to that sentence that did not sound insane. I do not know what impulse grabbed me next. Maybe it was arrogance. Maybe it was the need to prove that we had all seen the same impossible thing. Maybe some part of me thought that confronting it directly would break the spell, that if we pointed the camera and found nothing, it would all collapse into some stupid glitch video we could laugh about later. "Okay," I said, my voice shaking. "Okay. Just watch this. I'm going to point it right where she was." "Dude, maybe don't," Ryan started, but I was already backing out of the playback and tapping back into the camera. The live view popped up, flashlight flaring. My beam landed a little to the side of the tree at first. I adjusted, breathing shallow, then slowly began to pan toward the spot where she had appeared in the recording. The three of us leaned in so close that our heads almost knocked together. Jake's flashlight cut across mine at an angle, throwing extra shadows into the view. We were all staring at the little screen, not at the world around us. In reality, in the space just beyond the phone, there was only bark and shadow. The tree stood exactly where it always had. The crooked stones leaned in their same awkward directions. The grass between them rustled slightly in a barely there breeze. On the screen for a heartbeat, that was all we saw too. Grainy gray, the trunk pale in the light, the empty space where she had been. I remember a tiny, fleeting rush of relief. It lasted less than a second. Then the feed in the phone stuttered just once, a single hiccup in the image like a skipped frame, and she was there again. Closer this time. She filled more of the frame, her figure now occupying most of the vertical space. It was as if the lens had zoomed in on her by itself, tightening the world around her posture. Her head was already raised. There was no drawn-out ascent, no slow, jerky movement. It was like she had skipped the middle and jumped straight to the part where she was fully aware of us. The lower edge of the gown hovered just above the ground, not quite touching it. No legs moved beneath it. No weight shifted from one foot to the other. If she advanced, and watching it back frame by frame, I am convinced she did, it was not a step so much as a slide. A smooth, unnatural gliding forward, the way a figure would move if someone dragged their image across a screen. The sound on the camera changed too. The hiss thickened, then thinned, resolving into something that made my stomach flip. A breath. Not the hard, uneven breathing of three guys who had been walking around in the cold, freaked out. This was slower, deeper. A careful, deliberate inhale drawn in very close to the mic. It did not line up with any of our chests. It came at a different rhythm, a different depth. Jesus Jake exploded, the word ripping out of him louder than anything else we had said all night. He shoved my arm without meaning to, reacting with his whole body. My grip on the phone slipped the screen, tilting wildly for a second. The image lurched, blurring her figure into streaks of white and gray before it righted enough to catch her again at the edge of the frame. "Turn it off," Ryan said, voice sharp, the closest to panic I had ever heard from him. "Turn it off, man. I'm not kidding." My thumb scrambled for the stop button, the red square bouncing away from me as the camera jittered. The flashlight beam smeared across the ground, across her, across nothing. My fingers were suddenly clumsy, numb. "Stop recording," Ryan said again, lower this time. "Please." I found the button, pressed it. Just before the image cut to black and the clip saved, the microphone picked up one more sound. At normal volume, with the crush of our reactions, it disappeared. It hid under Jake's curse, under the scrape of his hand, against my jacket, under the tremor in my own okay. Years later, with headphones on and the volume nudged up far past where it should have been, I heard it. Underneath everything, like a second track pressed faintly over the main, there was a whisper. It was a woman's voice. Not crisp, not clear. Smudged around the edges, the consonants, soft, the vowels drawn out just a little too long. It said something that could have been "don't go," or "don't know," or both layered slightly out of sync with themselves. We did not catch it that night. We were too busy crashing back into ourselves, into our bodies, into the urgent need to be anywhere but standing in front of that tree with that screen between us and whatever the hell we had just invited in. We only heard our own noise then. The whisper had time to sink its shape into the recording quietly, like a fingerprint in wet paint. 4-1. The exit from the graveyard. There are moments where your body decides for you. The thinking part gets shoved into the back seat, and something older, more primitive, grabs the wheel. That is what happened after that last clip. I do not remember saying, "Let's go." I do not remember agreeing to leave or counting to 3 or making any kind of plan. I just remember that 1 second we were huddled around my phone, all three of us staring at the image of something that should not exist, and the next second we were moving. Running, really. The first step felt like breaking through a thin layer of ice. Grass tore under my shoes as I pushed off my body, lurching forward faster than my brain could catch up. The ground was softer than it looked, dipped in places where I did not expect it, so every stride had a little wobble to it. I could hear Jake and Ryan on either side of me, their footsteps a ragged, overlapping percussion. Somewhere in the chaos, someone kicked a loose stone. It tumbled and skittered loudly, clacking against another marker before disappearing into the dark. The sound was so sharp and out of place that for a split second, I thought it was something chasing us. We threaded ourselves between headstones that had been stationary for a century, our flashlights slashing wild paths across their faces. Names and dates flared and vanished in the swing of our beams. I caught glimpses of carved crosses, angels, and wreaths, all of it whipping past too fast to be more than impressions. The cemetery felt bigger on the way out, coming in the fence, and the little chain gate had seemed almost comically small, a minor boundary. Now they might as well have been on the other side of a football field. The more we ran, the further away that front edge seemed to stretch, like the rows of stones were lengthening in front of us, unspooling like a bad trick. My phone was still in my right hand. I had not remembered to shove it into my pocket. I held it in a death grip, my fingers locked so tight my knuckles ached. It felt heavier than it should have, like it was made of something denser than glass and plastic. The back of it was warm against my palm, too warm as if it had been sitting on a charger for hours instead of out in the cold night air. For some reason, the fact that I registered that I noticed the phone's heat while sprinting through a graveyard, makes me more uneasy now than almost anything else. The wind came back as we moved, but it did not feel right. Earlier, it had been a steady presence, a background push across the field. Now it arrived in short, sharp bursts, little gusts that hit us from odd angles, making dried leaves on the ground hiss and scrape against each other like whispered arguments. They came and went without pattern here, then gone, then back again 30 feet later. The distant rumble of the highway crept back into my hearing too, but it sounded altered, muted. It was like someone had recorded it and was playing it back to us through cheap speakers hidden somewhere in the trees. Around us, in the immediate pocket where our bodies and our fear and our lights existed, there was a weird kind of quiet. No dogs, no insects, no branches creaking unless our shoulders brushed them. The fence finally appeared ahead, the line of iron bars cutting across our path, darker than the night behind it. The opening where we had climbed over was a slightly lower dip in that shadow. "Watch it," Ryan snapped, but the word was chopped in half by his own momentum. We hit the fence in a messy tangle. There was no orderly one-at-a-time exit this time, no careful climbing. Jake grabbed the top bar and hauled himself up, one boot scraping the other, missing the lower rail entirely. He half fell, half dropped to the other side, his landing punctuated by a grunt. I threw one leg over metal cold and slick under my jeans. Dew had settled on the iron while we had been inside my shoe, sliding on the wet bar. My shin banged the top rail hard enough to send a shock up my leg. I hissed through my teeth and pushed off anyway, dropping down and stumbling as my foot hit the uneven ground on the outside. Behind me, Ryan vaulted with more force than grace. The sole of his shoe slipped on the damp metal, and for a heartbeat it looked like he was about to go backward. His hand shot out, fingers clamping over the nearest post. The chain that hung between the two gate posts jerked with the motion. The padlock at the end of it swung and smacked against the metal with a sharp, ringing clang. That sound went through me like a jolt. Not because it was particularly loud, it was not, but because it felt so final. like someone slamming a lid. All three of us flinched, shoulders hunching involuntarily, as if we expected something to answer back from inside the cemetery. Nothing did. We scrambled a few more steps away from the fence onto the sloping lip of the ditch. Loose gravel shifted under my shoes. For a second, my heels slid, and I windmilled my free arm to keep from falling. "Come on," Jake said, but his voice had lost its usual swagger. It came out tight, breathless. We climbed up out of the ditch and onto the asphalt. The road felt wrong under my feet, too hard after the soft give of the earth. My soles slapped against it with a hollow thud, each step echoing up through my knees. The darkness out here on this side of the fence off cemetery property did not feel much friendlier. It was like the sky and the ground had gotten slightly out of sync. The clouds overhead were still that flat, dull gray, but the shadows at the edges of the road seemed darker than they should have been, more saturated. The line where ditch met gravel and gravel met asphalt looked blurred, like someone had smudged it with a thumb. No cars came. We were standing in the middle of a county road, just after midnight on a Friday. 3 silhouettes clustered in the beam of 2 flashlights and the glow of a phone, and there were no headlights in either direction. No distant glow rounding the curve, just the long, empty stretch of blacktop and our own noise. "Let's just get to the car," Ryan said. He sounded like he was chewing the words, forcing them out between clenched teeth. We started across, halfway between the faded yellow lines and the dirt turnout where the Civic sat. My phone vibrated in my hand. Not a gentle notification buzz, a text, a random app. This was longer, harder. A sustained growl against my palm, the kind of vibration you get when a call is coming in, but the ringer is off. The shock of it made me suck in a breath. My fingers tightened, some part of me expecting the device to jump out of my grip. I glanced down. For a split second, the camera app vanished, the live feed of dark road and flailing flashlight beams collapsing into black. In its place, centered on the screen, was a simple call overlay. No photo, no name. Just those 3 small, precise words. No caller ID. The line under it showed the familiar slide to answer prompt, as if this were the most ordinary thing in the world. I did not hear any ringtone. There was no sound except our footsteps and the rasp of our breaths. The buzzing in my hand went on low and insistent. "Who is it?" Jake panted, catching the movement out of the corner of his eye. "Dude, seriously, who the hell is calling you right now?" I started, but the word barely formed. Before I could even decide whether to swipe, whether to throw the phone into the ditch, whether to drop it and stomp it into pieces, the vibration stopped. The call screen blinked out. For half a heartbeat, the glass was blank, reflecting a warped version of my own face, pale eyes, too wide mouth, half open. Then the camera app snapped back on, as if nothing had happened. The viewfinder once again showing the strip of road ahead and the vague glow of the Civic's shape across the way. The battery icon in the top corner flickered once and settled at 16%. "Who was it?" Ryan demanded, his voice razor thin now. "No one," I said automatically. It glitched. It said no caller ID, and then I did not bother finishing. There was no way to make that sound less insane, while our sneakers thudded on the empty asphalt, and the cemetery behind us watched with its rows of blind stones. We reached the other side and dropped down the slight slope into the turnout. The dark lump of the Civic waited where we had left it, coated in a faint sheen of dew that made the metal dull. The windows were black mirrors, the interior invisible. For one stupid second, I imagined someone sitting in the driver's seat. Not a person, her. Head tilted, hair hiding her face, hands folded politely in her lap. Waiting. My stomach cramped. "Keys," Jake said, voice tight. "Keys, keys, keys, come on." Ryan was already digging in his pocket, metal clinking against other metal. Behind us, the chain at the gate gave a tiny, unprovoked rattle in the wind, a light tap against the post. None of us looked back. 4.2, in the Civic, watching her again. The doors did not close in unison. They slammed one after another, 3 separate, desperate thuds that made the whole car shudder. First Ryan's as he dove into the driver's seat and yanked it shut like something might be lunging for the handle. Then Jake's a half second later, the metal thunk echoing a little in the small turnout. Mine came last. I slid into the front passenger seat, dragging the door behind me with more force than I needed, the latch catching with a sharp, hollow click. For a brief, suspended moment, everything went utterly still. The inside of the Civic smelled like it always did: old fabric seats, stale fast food, cheap air freshener trying and failing to cover it. The familiarity should have comforted me. Instead, it made the whole thing feel like a bad loop. The same car, the same friends, a night gone horribly sideways. My chest heaved. The seatbelt dug into my shoulder, still tangled from where I had not fully straightened it the last time I rode in the car. The windows were fogged faintly at the edges, little crescents of condensation, where our combined breath had already started to cling to the glass. Ryan jammed the keys into the ignition with more force than necessary and twisted. The engine turned over, whining for a second before catching with a low, rumbling hum. The entire frame vibrated, a subtle shiver that traveled up through the seats. That sound, old, imperfect, undeniably mechanical, hit me with a wave of weird comfort. Machines made sense. Engines made sense. Ghosts did not. The instrument panel lit up in tired green. Fuel gauge, tachometer, a soft chime as the seatbelt light flickered to life, accusing all of us. Ryan immediately cranked the heater. The fan spun up with an eager whir, followed by a rush of lukewarm air that grew hotter by degrees. It blasted against the cold skin of my fingers where they still wrapped around my phone. The contrast made them sting. Outside, the world was reduced to whatever the headlights caught in front of us, and the faint reflection of our own faces in the dark glass. Behind that, the cemetery was just a void. No sign, no stones, no tree, just a wall of black that seemed to swallow the light. "Okay," Ryan said tightly, hands still locked on the wheel even though we had not moved. "We're leaving. Now. Wait." Jake's voice cut across his rough and breathless. He leaned forward from the back seat, one hand braced on the center console between us. "Play it again." Ryan turned on him, eyes wide. "Are you kidding me? Just once," Jake said. His bravado was shredded, but there was a stubbornness in what was left. "I need to see if that was real, if it looks the same in here. If we were just freaking ourselves out over, I don't know, over nothing." "Nothing," Ryan snapped. "You call that nothing?" "I didn't say it was nothing," Jake said. "I said I need to know." He and Ryan locked eyes in the rearview mirror for a heartbeat. Something electric hung between them, stretched tight. Then Ryan broke first, looking away, jaw working. "Just make it fast," he muttered. "Then we're gone." He did not reach over to stop me. That was as close to permission as we were going to get. My thumb hovered over the screen for a second, slick with sweat despite the cold. I could have lied. I could have said the file had corrupted, that it was gone, that it had somehow vanished between the graveyard and the car. Instead, I opened the Photos app. The last clip sat at the top of the grid, its thumbnail a muddy blur of gray and white. Even shrunken down to that little rectangle, I could see the faint outline of the tree trunk, the suggestion of something pale near it. It felt like a staring eye. "Okay," I said quietly. "Come closer if you want to see." Jake moved immediately, leaning over the center console, so far, his shoulder pressed into the back of my seat. His breath hit the side of my neck, hot and uneven. Ryan stayed where he was, but shifted his weight, leaning just enough that his face hovered near my shoulder, eyes fixed on the phone. We were 3 grown men hunched forward like kids around a campfire, our heads so close we were almost knocking together. The heater's breath filled the car with a low, steady rush. The engine hummed underneath. Outside, the night pressed in. I hit play. The video opened on the same shaky view of the grass and stones, the beam of my flashlight dragging across them. My recorded breathing rode over the faint hiss of the mic. Past me's muttered words were barely audible. Watch, I whispered as much to myself as to them. The frame began to turn the tree, moving slowly into the center of the shot. For a second, all you could see were the crooked stones at its base and the shadowed line of the woods behind it. Then she stepped into existence again, sudden, absolute. The gown, the hair, the stillness. Closer this time, her pale form occupying more of the vertical space. The fabric of her dress blurred around the edges, but not enough to hide the solid feel of her shape beneath it. The interior of the Civic seemed to shrink down to the size of that screen. The green of the dashboard lights and the soft glow of the radio display blurred out of my awareness. Even the rumble of the engine moved to the background. The loudest sound was the dull thud of my own pulse in my ears. Jesus, Jake breathed, but there was no anger in it now, only awe and fear. I scrubbed the playback back a few seconds, then let it roll again slower. This time I pointed out details that my gut had noticed, even if my brain had not named them yet. Look at her shoulders, I said softly. See that her outline was wrong. Subtly but undeniably. Her shoulders were angled just a little too sharply, like the joint sat higher than it should have, or like something was pulling her arms inward in a way human bones do not like. The line from neck to shoulder kinked where it should have curved. Ryan did not speak, but I saw his throat bob in the faint reflection on the screen. We watched her move, if you could call it that. The way her head lifted in those unnatural, lagging increments. The tiny, disjointed ticks of motion. The way her hair seemed to clump and smear as it shifted individual strands, never quite resolving, like the camera could not decide whether to show them or not. I slid the volume up with a fingertip. The noise floor grew. Static hiss. A faint, low hum from the phone's own electronics. And under that, like a thread woven through cloth, the breath. It came in slowly, longer than any of ours. Not a gasp, not a pant from running. A measured inhale. The kind someone takes when they are standing very close to you and want to smell what fear does to your skin. In the small bubble of the Civic's interior, hearing that sound again made my stomach knot. The sense of shame that had been simmering under my fear suddenly surged. It felt like we had recorded something we were not supposed to see. Like we had cracked open a door that had been closed for a reason and shoved a camera through the gap. The act of pointing a lens at her felt, in retrospect, like an intrusion. Like catching someone in a private moment and refusing to look away. Jake must have felt some version of that too, because his usual commentary had died. He was not narrating, not cracking jokes. His mouth was slightly open, corners pulled down. The light from the phone washed his face pale. "Delete it," he said, but his eyes did not leave the screen. "I'm serious. After this, just get rid of it. You're the one who wanted to see it again." Ryan muttered, but there was no heat behind it. "Yeah," Jake said hoarsely. "I was wrong. We kept watching anyway." I paused the video mid-motion, trying to get a better look at her face, or what passed for one. The image froze. Pixels crawled slightly the way they do on low-res video when everything is still, but the compression is still chewing. Her head was halfway through one of those jerky lifts. The curtain of hair parted just enough that you could see a suggestion of what lay beneath a pale oval, two darker smudges, the impression of something like a mouth. I inched the scrub bar forward a fraction of a second, then another. I was hunting for that one frame where everything would line up, where her posture would be clearest, where I could trick myself into thinking I could understand what I was looking at. When I landed on it, something inside me lurched. On that single perfect pause, her head was tilted in a way I had not seen in real time. Not just raised toward the camera, not just angled at the person holding the phone. It was tipped slightly to one side, just a few degrees off center, like someone studying something, over the edge of a fence. The kind of angle you use when you are trying to see around someone else. If you traced a line from the invisible eyes in that blurred face out into the world, it did not land where I had been standing in the cemetery. It landed exactly where we were sitting now, right where the Civic would have been parked. Right where three idiots would be huddled over a screen playing this exact frame back, our heads bowed just enough that she would have a clean line of sight into the car. The heater seemed to stutter for a second, the fan hiccuping before pressing on. The engine's hum felt suddenly louder, then softer, as if my ears could not decide what to focus on. I realized I had been holding my breath. "Did you see that?" I whispered. Jake swallowed audibly. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah. I saw it." Ryan did not answer, but his hand tightened so hard on the steering wheel that the tendons stood out white against his skin. On the screen, frozen in that awful, impossible angle, she waited. 4-3. Back home with the clip. The drive back felt like an aftershock. When we finally pulled away from the turnout, Ryan took the first curve a little too fast, like he wanted physical distance as badly as I did. The beams of the Civic's headlights chased the white line, carving out a narrow tunnel of road ahead. Everything outside that cone could have been anything, and I did not want to think too hard about that. No one touched the radio. The dash display sat there in its dull green glow, the station numbers frozen on whatever we had been listening to before all of this started. It would have taken one finger to bring the music back, but none of us reached for it. The only sounds were the engine's low rumble, the slap thump of our tires over bad patches of pavement, and the occasional rattle from somewhere in the aging frame when we hit a dip too hard. Jake sank back into his seat, hoodie half over his head. In the mirror, I could see him staring straight ahead, not at the road, but past it, eyes unfocused. Every now and then, his hand twitched, like he was about to reach for his phone, and then thought better of it. Ryan drove with both hands at 10 and 2, the way driving school instructors dream of. His knuckles were pale on the steering wheel. He did not speed, not really, but he did not drift either. Every turn was exact, every lane change deliberate, focused, hyper-aware. I held my phone face down on my thigh screen, dark, as if that would make any difference. The further we got from County Road 19, the more the world began to fill back in. Streetlights reappeared, little yellow islands of safety along the roadside. Houses cropped up one by one with porch lights burning and jack-o'-lanterns still glowing on stoops. By the time we hit Georgeville again, the familiar glow of gas station signs and fast food logos lined the horizon like beacons from a stupider, simpler world. When we pulled into the apartment complex, the parking lot was half full. A few cars sat under flickering poles, their windshields silvered. Somewhere, a muffled bass line thumped from a unit on the ground floor. Someone laughed too loudly, the sound snapping the air and then dissolving. Ryan found a spot 2 rows away from our building and killed the engine. The sudden absence of vibration made my stomach lurch. For a moment, none of us moved. Then Jake spoke, his voice hoarse. "We're not just going to pretend that didn't happen, right?" Ryan let out a breath that sounded like it had been stuck in his chest the whole drive. "We're going inside," he said. "We're locking the door." Then we're never talking about this again. Yeah, Jake said. No, I need to see it on a real screen. He leaned forward, gripping the back of my seat. You still got the HDMI cable, right, for the Xbox, or we can mirror it. Whatever. I want to see what it looks like bigger. Make sure we're not just seeing faces in static or whatever. Ryan turned his head slowly, giving him a look that said everything. You want it bigger? I want it clearer, Jake shot back. If this is in your phone, it's in your phone. You can't undo that. So we either figure out what we actually captured, or we sit here freaking ourselves out over something we won't even look at properly. It was warped logic, but it was logic. And some part of me understood. I did not want that clip to live as a half-seen thing in the corner of my mind. If it was going to haunt me, I wanted to at least know its shape. Fine, I said quietly. Inside. The apartment felt wrong the second we opened the door. Nothing in it had changed. The same sagging couch, the same cheap coffee table with the empty beer bottles, the cold pizza congealed in the open box. The TV still showed the muted horror marathon now on some low-budget movie where a man in a rubber mask was chasing a screaming woman down a hallway. But after the graveyard, everything felt too bright. The overhead light in the living room buzzed and glared off the white walls. The kitchen fluorescents were a harsh humming strip. Even the glow from the TV seemed aggressive. It was like coming out of a dim theater into noon daylight, everything overexposed, too sharp. Normal sounds rushed in to fill the silence we had brought back with us. The fridge hummed in the kitchen compressor, clicking to a slightly higher pitch as it cycled. Upstairs, our neighbor's TV leaked through the ceiling in a faint, tinny murmur, laughter track, applause, muffled dialogue. The clock on the kitchen wall ticked steadily, each second, a tiny, precise tap. The furnace kicked on with a low whoosh from the vents, warm air stretching through the ductwork. It should have been comforting, familiar. Instead, it just reminded me that the world I trusted could exist at the same time as the one we had just walked through. Jake went straight for the TV. HDMI, he said more to himself than to us, crouching by the entertainment center. Yeah, here. Plug it in. I handed him my phone with more reluctance than I wanted to show. The glass was slick with sweat. He wiped his palm on his jeans, then connected the cable the phone suddenly tethered to the bigger blank-eyed screen in front of us. Ryan hovered by the door for a second, like he was considering leaving. His hand found the deadbolt and turned it almost unconsciously, the solid thunk of it sliding home echoing louder than it should have. Then he crossed the room and sank onto the far end of the couch, as far from the TV as he could get, while still being in the same space. Last time he said, "Then I'm done. I mean it." I sat in my usual spot, sinking into the same sagging cushion where I had been a few hours earlier, when this was just another October Friday, and my biggest worry was running out of beer. Jake selected the clip. The TV blinked once, then filled with gray. On the big screen, the graininess was magnified. The camera's struggle with the low light became its own texture, a crawling static over the entire image. The graves looked less like solid stones and more like shapes cut out of fog. The tree's trunk blurred around the edges, its outline fuzzed. And yet when she appeared, all that noise seemed to pull back from her. Her form, blown up to fill almost a third of the screen, felt even more wrong at that size. The proportions were off just enough to make my eyes ache trying to reconcile them, shoulders too narrow for the length of her arm's head, tilted at a degree that strained something at the base of my own neck just to look at it. The gown's fabric wavered with the compression, but the overall impression of her shape was solid, intentional. Jake turned the volume up. The room filled with the hiss of the recording. Our footsteps over grass louder now, a crunching rhythm that felt intrusive in the small apartment. My own recorded voice sounded thin and far away. When that other breath came in slow, deliberate, too close to the mic, it seemed to blow right across the surface of the TV and into the air between us. Ryan shifted his eyes, flicking away from the screen. He glanced at the living room window where the blinds were drawn, but not quite closed, a slim strip of darkness visible between the slats. He looked at the peephole set into the door, at the shadowed mouth of the hallway that led to our bedrooms and the bathroom. "This is stupid," he said. "We're doing this to ourselves. We went to a creepy place, we filmed creepy shit. Now we're sitting here freaking ourselves out over shadows and static. That's all this is." He stayed seated. He did not get up. For all his protests, he did not leave. At some point, my bladder reminded me I was still human. "I'm gonna hit the bathroom," I muttered, pushing myself up before the next awful frame could freeze itself into my brain. "Pause it or whatever." Jake grunted in acknowledgement, eyes glued to the TV. Ryan said nothing. The hallway felt narrower than usual, the light at the end of it weaker. I flicked on the bathroom light and shut the door behind me with more force than necessary. The small room lit up in harsh white, the mirror over the sink, reflecting a version of me I did not like, paler than usual, eyes rimmed in red, jaw clenched tight. The overhead fan whirred to life when I hit the switch, that cheap, rattling vent sound that every apartment bathroom seems to have. Water ran in the pipes somewhere inside the wall as a neighbor turned on a tap. From the living room filtered through the door and the drywall, I could just make out the muffled audio of the video playing again. Footsteps, my own distant voice, the hiss of the night. As I stood at the sink, hands braced on either side of it, I heard it, the part where she lifted her head. I did not need to see it to know. Something in the quality of the sound changed, a drop in the outside noise, that unnatural inhale. At that exact moment, the bathroom fan above me slowed. The whir dropped a few pitches, stretching out into a lower whining drone. The air coming from the vent lessened, the weak stream of it barely brushing the top of my head. It lasted a full second, maybe two, long enough for me to look up, heart-thudding, imagining the fan blades straining against some invisible weight. Then it sped back up. The pitch climbed, the airflow returned, the sound settling into its normal, annoying rattle as if nothing had happened. I turned the water on too hard just to have another noise. The faucet sputtered and then ran steady, the splash loud in the small room. I stared at my hands under it until my knuckles turned pink. That night, after Jake finally left and Ryan shut himself in his room with a muttered goodnight, I lay in my own bed in the dim glow of the alarm clock. The apartment had gone back to its usual nighttime soundtrack, fridge humming, distant TV upstairs, the occasional car in the parking lot. Sleep did not come. Sometime after 2, I gave in and reached for my phone on the nightstand. The screen lit my face in cold blue. Notifications blinked, a missed group chat, an email I did not care about, a low battery warning. I opened the Photos app, telling myself I was just making sure it was still there, that it had not been some kind of shared hallucination. The clip sat at the top of my camera roll, its thumbnail the same muddy smear of cemetery and tree. My chest tightened just seeing it. Then I noticed something else. Beneath recents, a new album had appeared. Imports. I had never created an album called that. I had not imported anything. We had shot everything that night straight onto my phone. I had not connected it to a computer since. My thumb hovered over it, then tapped. Inside, there was exactly one file. The same 15-second clip. Same date. Same timestamp. Same frame. Duplicated without my help, filed neatly into a place meant for things that come from somewhere else. 5.1. Trying to forget time did what it always does when it has no idea how to fix anything. It kept moving. Winter slid in. The cheap windows in our apartment started sweating on the inside. The parking lot filled with dirty snow, and then with gray slush, and then with puddles. Halloween decorations came down. Christmas lights went up. The cemetery on County Road 19 stayed exactly where it was, but I stopped thinking about it every single day. I wish I could say we had some big, definitive conversation about what happened, that the three of us sat down and compared notes and admitted we had seen the same thing. We did not. We talked around it. For a few weeks afterward, it hovered between us like a bad smell. Jake would start a sentence with, "Remember that night," and then lose steam halfway through. Ryan, if he was in the room, would just say, "Yeah," in this flat final tone and change the subject. Eventually, the mentions stopped. We still hung out. We still watched movies and talked about work and complained about rent. But the graveyard incident became one of those things we pretended had never quite solidified into a real memory. Life did what it does. It piled other things on top. Ryan was the first to really move on. He met someone at work who did not have any interest in sitting in graveyards for content. They started dating, got serious. His weekends filled up with dinners and trips and family stuff. He moved out the following summer into an apartment with her across town. I helped him carry boxes down the stairs and load them into a rented truck, and tried not to think about how much lighter his side of the living room looked once his stuff was gone. Jake and I drifted, not because of anything dramatic, but because that is what happens when you are not held together by anything stronger than proximity and shared vices. He picked up more shifts. I picked up more responsibilities at work. Our schedules stopped lining up. Texts took longer to answer. Invitations got more half-hearted. We did not fight. We just diluted. Outside of those slow changes, the world stayed stubbornly ordinary. I still had to show up at my boring office job. I still had to answer emails and sit in meetings about things that would not matter in 6 months. I still had to do my laundry and empty the trash and remember my mom's birthday. On the surface, nothing in my life looked haunted. Underneath, little things started to calcify. I stopped taking the shortcut that led me past County Road 19. It was a small adjustment, 10 extra minutes on the highway, a couple more exits, but it felt like drawing a line. If my GPS suggested that route, I would tap avoid without thinking. When passengers asked why I would say something about construction or bad potholes, no one argued. Driving at night, anytime my headlights swept over a patch of roadside trees or a break in the fence, my stomach would clench for a second. I would brace for the shape of a woman in white that never appeared, my fingers tightening on the steering wheel until the feeling passed. My phone became a small, silent landmine in my pocket. Most of the time, I could pretend the clip was just another file, one more rectangle in a grid of birthdays and barbecues and blurred highway shots. It sat there in recents, and in that weird imports album, the phone had conjured like a stray tooth in a bowl of rice. I scrolled past it quickly. If I needed to find a picture from that month, I would narrow my eyes and move fast, flicking my thumb with just enough speed that the tiny gray thumbnail of the tree and the faint hint of her shape never had time to register. It was like skipping a song on a playlist you could not delete but refused to hear. Sometimes, though, my finger would slip. The screen would stutter, and the clip would open for a split second, just long enough for the first frame of grainy cemetery to flare into view before I killed it, heart pounding in my throat. I tried to be rational. That became its own ritual. Late at night, when the apartment was quiet and the fridge hummed and the clock ticked relentlessly on the kitchen wall, I would sit on the couch with my laptop and fall down research holes. Glitchy camera footage, exposure artifacts, rolling shutter effects. I read about how phone cameras scan the scene line by line instead of capturing all the light at once, how that can make moving things look bent, smeared, or multiplied. People posted videos of their ceiling fans turning into 3-armed spirals of car wheels that seemed to spin in impossible directions. Someone in a forum threw out the phrase LED rolling shutter ghosts to describe the way certain lights left streaks or phantom shapes across frames when the timing lined up wrong. For a little while, I clung to that like a lifeline. Maybe she was just a trick of light, a weird composite of headlights, street lamps, and my own shaky hands. Maybe my brain had done the rest, pouring fear into the gaps, until a smear of pixels turned into a woman-shaped figure. Except there had been no lights out there but ours. Except all 3 of us had seen her. Still having a word artifact pareidolia rolling shutter helped. It gave me something to tell myself when I woke up at 3 in the morning with the image of her frozen under my eyelids. It is a glitch. Brains see patterns in noise. That is all. The sharp terror of that night dulled over time the way a fresh cut scabs and turns into a thin, shiny scar. It was still there, still tender to the touch, but I could go days, weeks, even without pressing on it. The clip became part of the background, an ugly little fact about my phone I had trained myself to work around. I knew it was there. I just tried not to interact with it. Until the night I decided I was done trying to work around it. I was alone in the apartment. Ryan had long since moved out. Jake had stopped dropping by unannounced. It was just me, the couch, the TV, and a bottle I had been steadily emptying since dinner. The world outside the sliding glass door was black, the parking lot lights smearing in streaks across the wet asphalt. Some late movie murmured on the TV, all shadows and orchestral stabs and actors pretending to be afraid of things that did not exist. I was more than a little drunk. That stupid, loose kind of drunk where your thoughts feel both very profound and very flexible. It hit me all at once, this is ridiculous. I was letting a 15-second video control the way I moved through my own camera roll. I was detouring my life around a file, around pixels, around something I could theoretically erase. The more I thought about it, the more it felt like a test. Like it, I corrected myself, only had the power I gave it. If I could delete it and live with whatever weird guilt or fear came after, maybe it would finally become just a bad story instead of an ongoing problem. I opened photos. The white interface lit my face in cold blue. I scrolled with less care than usual, liquid courage spreading warm and stupid in my veins. There it was. Thumbnail gray smear of tree and stones. Timestamp that night that year. The little preview bar underneath it showing the length 0:15. My hand trembled, but I pressed and held. The options popped up: share, favorite, hide, delete. Delete, I said out loud to no one. Delete, delete, delete. I tapped it. The phone asked if I was sure. Did I want to delete this video? This action cannot be undone. Yes, I said, and hit delete video. It vanished from recents. My heart skipped. I went into the imports album. There it was again, the same rectangle like a twin. I selected it. Delete. Confirmed. It popped out of existence, leaving the album blank. My chest loosened a fraction. Just to be safe, I opened recently deleted. There it sat, along with the accidental screenshots and blurry bar photos I had cleared out over the past month. The thumbnail looked smaller in that folder, somehow more innocuous, like a crime tucked into evidence. I selected all, deleted all. The folder emptied, cycling through a brief animation of nothingness. There, I said, sitting back. Done. I turned off the TV, stumbled through brushing my teeth, and collapsed into bed. Sleep came faster than usual, aided by alcohol, and the smug, shaky satisfaction of having done something that scared me. The next day at work, life went on. Emails, Slack pings, the drone of fluorescent lights. At lunch, a coworker asked to see the damage from my latest minor parking lot fender bender. "You said the bumper got scraped, right?" he said around a mouthful of salad. "Let me see. I might know a guy." I pulled out my phone, thumbed it awake, opened photos without thinking, muscle memory guiding me. I flicked down to last weekend, looking for the picture I had taken of my dented car under the apartment lights. It was sitting near the top of recents. Right beside it, at the very top of the grid, was the cemetery clip. Same thumbnail, same timestamp from that night years ago. Same length, 0:15, back like I had just taken it. Not in imports, not in recently deleted, just there, front and center. Waiting, 5.2, new phone's old ghost. If this were just a story about one haunted night, I could maybe live with it, file it away under dumb things I did in my 20s, and move on. It did not stay there. The phone that recorded the clip was a cracked old iPhone 4. The screen was spiderwebbed in the top right corner from a fall in a Kroger parking lot. The battery ran hot if I used it too long. The home button stuck sometimes. It was not a device built for permanence. A couple of years after the graveyard, it finally gave up. One morning, it just refused. I woke up, reached for it, and the screen stayed black. No startup logo, no low battery icon, nothing. I held power and home until my fingers ached, plugged it in. Different outlet, different cord. There was no vibration, no chime. Dead. At the Apple store under skylights and the soft murmur of too loud, too happy employees, a guy in a blue shirt took one look and gave me that sympathetic grimace they must practice in training. "Yeah," he said. "If it's not responding to recovery mode, the motherboard's probably gone. Data's basically toast unless you had a backup." That word backup sat heavy. "I did," I said. I think I did. iCloud. Whatever." He smiled. "Then you're good. When you set up the new one, just sign in and all your memories come with you." All your memories. I forced a laugh, because that is what you do when a stranger says something accidentally horrible and has no idea. He brought out a newer model, fresh and shiny screen, uncracked and too bright. We sat at one of those fake wood tables while he walked me through the steps, choose language region, Wi-Fi. Sign in with Apple ID, restore from backup. The progress bar appeared. Little segments filled white on black under the words restoring from iCloud. The store around me hummed people talking about trade-ins, kids mashing fingerprints all over iPads, a distant pop track playing overhead through hidden speakers. I watched that bar crawl forward and thought absurdly, this is the part in the movie where you just leave. I didn't. I sat there like a normal person nodding along as the tech made small talk about storage options and camera quality. When the restore finished, he handed me the phone. "You're all set," he said. "Give it a little while for the photos to finish coming down, but everything should show up." "Cool," I said. My voice sounded thin. He moved on to the next customer. I sat there in that plastic chair under fluorescent light that made everyone look slightly sick and opened photos. At first, it was just empty gray squares with spinning circles in them, the thumbnails still loading. Slowly, they resolved a picture of my old apartment kitchen badly lit. A blurry shot of a friend's birthday cake. A screenshot of some meme. A picture of my car with a dented bumper. And then 3 rows down there it was. That tiny sliver of cemetery. The faint outline of the tree. The gray smear of stones. 15 seconds ready to play. I locked the phone, put it face down on the table, and sat there gripping the edge until my knuckles went white. Over the next few years, my devices changed the way everyone's do. The new iPhone got sluggish and old. A corner chip grew into a long crack across the glass. I upgraded again. Then, in a minor fit of wanting to be different, I switched to Android, convincing myself the change would be clean, a fresh start. Every time there was some version of the same ritual. Bright store, plastic chairs, a too cheerful employee in a polo shirt asking about carriers and data plans. My old phone and my new one sitting side by side on a counter, joined by a cable or the invisible tether of Wi-Fi. Don't worry, they all said in one form or another. We'll get all your photos and videos over. You won't lose anything. I wanted to say, that's the problem. I never did. Once at a Best Buy, I sat under buzzing fluorescent tubes, while a kid who could not have been more than 20 tapped through menus faster than I could follow. My old phone's screen showed a spinning wheel under the words, "Transferring your data." The new phone sat blank beside it, waiting to be filled with my life. So this'll bring over like everything I asked, even though I knew the answer. He grinned. Yeah, man. Photos, contacts, texts, all your memories. It's freaky how seamless it is now. Seamless. That was one word for it. When the transfer finished, he slid the new phone toward me, proud of it, like he had built it himself. I signed whatever form I was supposed to sign. He drifted off to help someone else compare soundbars. I opened the gallery just to check. Vacation photos showed up first. A beach I barely remembered being on my own face, half hidden behind sunglasses. There were random screenshots from Instagram, blurry bar shots the time I thought it was funny to take a picture of my coworker asleep at his desk. And then that thumbnail again. Same washed out gray. Same black smear of the tree trunk. The tiny ghosted hint of her shape if you knew what to look for. New phone. Same ghost. I tried to outsmart it once on my own, without a helpful 20-year-old in a lanyard watching over my shoulder. Somewhere between upgrades, I switched off automatic photo backup. I told myself it was about storage, about not paying for more cloud space. The truth was that the idea of this thing multiplying in servers I would never see made my skin crawl. I manually moved over only what I thought I wanted: a few choice albums, a couple of PDFs, the bare minimum of contacts. I unchecked boxes. I deleted old backups. I Googled phrases like erase media from iCloud permanently late at night, words swimming on the screen. Once I actually called support. I sat at my kitchen table with my phone on speaker, listening to the hold music loop through gentle corporate synths, and rehearsed what I was going to say. I have a video I don't want anymore. I need it gone. Not just deleted, gone. When a woman finally picked up, her voice was bright and practiced. She asked how my day was. I lied and said fine. I told her I wanted to know how to completely wipe certain media from a backup. She launched into an explanation about settings and toggles and how photos sync across devices. Somewhere around the part where she mentioned optimized storage, my brain fuzzed over. I realized that to really follow her instructions, I would have to sit down in front of a computer, sign into my account, and look at everything in one place. Everything. My mouth dried. I thanked her before she had finished, blamed a bad connection, and hung up. I never called back. It was not always sterile tech support rooms and big box stores. One of the transfers happened in a Starbucks, because apparently that is a thing now. Switch your whole digital life over while you wait for your latte. I sat at a tiny table near the back, old phone and new one side by side, a cable between them. The place smelled like burnt espresso and sugar. People talked over the hiss of milk steaming. An indie playlist hummed from ceiling speakers, all breathy vocals and acoustic guitar. The barista called someone's name. The blender roared. My new phone chimed once data transfer complete. I opened the gallery. Same ritual, same tension in my throat. Birthdays, road trips, food pics I never posted. And there, like a stain that ignores soap, the graveyard clip reappeared perched at the top of recents, like it had been waiting for its new home to finish installing. At that exact moment, the song playing in the cafe glitched. It was mid-chorus, a slow swell of synth and voice when the track seemed to skip. Not back to the beginning, not forward to the next song. It stuttered, one beat stuck, repeating twice in quick succession. My brain expected the music to unravel, to cut out completely. Instead, it caught itself and kept going like nothing had happened. For that brief, hiccuping second, the only clear sounds in the whole space were the hiss of the espresso machine and the high insect-like whine of the refrigerator behind the pastry case. It felt like being inside the phone again. That same sense of the normal soundtrack dipping away just long enough for something else to step closer. On one of those newer phones, sleeker, faster, smarter than the one that had recorded her in the first place, I did something I had not done before. I opened the video's info. I do not know what I expected. Maybe nothing. Maybe reassurance. A couple of lines of metadata file size resolution creation date. Just numbers. The created field was exactly what it should have been. October. The year that has been stapled to this whole story in my head. The timestamp matching what I remembered from that night when we tumbled back into the apartment and sat on the couch, hands still shaking. Below it, another line, last modified. The date there was not from that year. It was from the previous week. A Tuesday. I had been at work that day at my desk in a beige-walled cubicle under buzzing fluorescent lights. I had eaten a sad sandwich over my keyboard, scrolled through emails, answered a Teams call. I had not, as far as I knew, opened the Photos app. I had not watched the clip. I had not even thought about it. Yet according to the phone, according to whatever quiet bookkeeping runs under the glass, something had touched that file then. Changed it. Saved it again. Created the night we filmed her. Last modified a random weekday where I definitely was not standing in a cemetery. I stared at those lines until the screen dimmed, then went dark, reflecting only my own face and the faint, warped shape of the room behind me. 5-3. Watching with headphones. Curiosity does not come back all at once. It creeps. For a long time, the clip just lived there in the corner of my phone like a spider in a ceiling corner you pretend not to see. I worked new jobs. I moved apartments. Jake and I stopped talking altogether. Ryan sent Christmas photos of his kids from another state. The graveyard became a thing I mentioned only to myself in silent reruns at 3 a.m. Then years later, I had one of those nights where everything feels slightly unreal anyway. Work was loud. The world was loud. My head was loud. I came home to a quiet, current apartment, microwaved some leftovers I barely tasted, and sat in the dim living room, staring at nothing. The thought arrived like a push from behind, watch it properly. One time, in the dark, with headphones. Then you'll know. I told myself it was about closure, that if I studied it like evidence instead of a campfire story I refused to look at, I could file it away. Trick of the light. Glitch, fear, whatever. Anything with a neat label, so I set the stage like an idiot. TV off. Blinds pulled all the way shut, plastic slats knocking softly as they settled. The only light came from a cheap floor lamp turned to its lowest setting in the corner, throwing more shadow than comfort. The kitchen was a darker rectangle off to the side where the fridge hummed steadily, the occasional click of its compressor kicking a little louder for a second. My laptop dozed on the coffee table fan, making a soft, constant whir. I sat on the couch, plugged a pair of decent over-ear headphones into my phone, and pulled them down over my ears until the world outside dulled. That small, private silence that comes just before the audio kicks in was somehow worse than the noises had been. Photos. Scroll. There it was near the top of recents again. It did not matter how many new pictures I took, the car receipts, a blurry shot of a lunch with coworkers. Sooner or later, the grid rearranged itself and pushed her back toward the front. I tapped the thumbnail. The video filled the screen in portrait mode. My reflection hovered faintly and the black borders above and below it warped by the glass. I took a breath. I tried to make steady hit play and let the years fold back in on themselves. At first, it was all the things I already knew. The shaky flashlight beam, the grain sliding across the image like static ants, the tree in the distance, the stones at its base, our footsteps thudding on dead grass sounding heavier in the headphones than they ever had in any room. This time I listened harder. I focused on the layers most people never hear when they play a video at normal volume in a bright room. The faint breaths that weren't quite mine. The subtle, unnatural drop in ambient noise right when she first appears, where the highway hush cuts out mid-murmur like someone took scissors to the soundtrack. I noticed something new. My own footsteps did not always line up with the audio. In the video, the camera bobs predictably with each step, but the crunch of the grass sometimes lagged by a hair, like someone had nudged the sound half a frame to the left. It was small, almost nothing, but once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it. When she came into frame, blown up inches from my face instead of across a room, it felt like leaning too close to a bad painting and realizing it is not paint at all, just shapes that shouldn't be that close. I paused and scrubbed. Back and forth, back and forth. The progress bar under my thumb jumped and slid, the frozen frames flickering between glimpses of the tree, the stones, the smears of my own flashlight arc. I hunted for that one specific moment I half remembered from the Civic, the tilt. There, in the middle of that motion between chin down and head up, I found it. One tiny frame, barely a blink, where her head was not pointed at the camera. Not pointed at the version of me holding the phone back then. Instead, it was turned slightly to the side. It is hard to describe how wrong it looks without sounding dramatic. Her blurred face seemed stretched a little longer in that frame, like the pixels gave up trying to form normal human proportions. The dark hollows where eyes might be are wider, not huge, just slightly more open, as if whatever was under that curtain of hair had taken more interest. And the direction of that interest was not toward the lens. It was angled past it, past me, straight through the screen at a line that now ended in my current couch, in my current living room years later. My scalp prickled under the headphones. My fingers felt too big, clumsy on the glass. I made myself hit play again. The clip rolled onto the part we had always argued about, the whisper. Back then, over the car engine and our yelling and the panic, we had written it off as don't go or don't know, like a badly dialed radio station bleeding into our moment. In the graveyard and the Civic and the apartment, I had never really gotten more specific than that. Now in the dark, with the volume pushed stupidly high and the rest of the world outside my ears held at bay, I dragged the playback down to half speed, then quarter speed. The recorded night stretched into something thick, syrupy. Our voices flattened and deepened. The breath, the extra one, became a long, slow scrape. And under Jake's curse, under Ryan's turn it off, under the noise of my own panic, it was there. Not don't go, not don't know. It was my name. Drawn out, breathy, the consonant softened by the mic, but still clear enough that I could not pretend otherwise. The vowel warped into a strange, intimate tone, like someone exhaling it onto the glass between us. Hearing your own name in a stranger's mouth is always a little jarring, hearing it whispered by something that should not have any mouth at all, years after the fact, in headphones that seal the sound directly into your skull that does something else entirely. My throat closed. I ripped the headphones off faster than I meant to. The sudden absence of sound made the room feel huge and hollow. The fridge hum rushed back in. The laptop fan, the distant plumbing somewhere in the building, my own breathing too loud, too fast. I sat there on the couch, heart-pounding headphones hanging from my hand, the phone screen still glowing in my lap with the frozen, half-blurred frame of the tree. It took me a second to realize I had been holding the device like it was something hot I didn't want touching my skin. I was about to lock the screen when the phone buzzed. Not the long, low vibration of an incoming call. A short, cheery little tap-tap, the kind that usually heralds some harmless algorithm deciding what you want. A banner slid down from the top edge of the screen. One of those bland cloud apps that pretend to care about your life had a suggestion for me. A little colored icon, a line of text, "We made a memory for you." Below that, in bold, "A night to remember." And as the thumbnail for this auto-generated nostalgia collage, this friendly little algorithmic gift, it had chosen a still frame from the cemetery clip. Not the tree, not the stones. Her pale gown, hair curtaining most of her face, head tilted at that slight wrong angle. Smiling, if you believed the app like this was some treasured moment I might want to revisit and share. 6.1. The decision to return after the A night to remember notification sleep stopped feeling like something that happened to me and started feeling like something I had to sneak up on. For a while, I tried to ignore it. I turned off all memories in every app I could find. I disabled notifications from cloud services, hid the stupid collage, moved the clip back out of favorites and into the mental corner where I'd been trying to keep it for years. It did not help. I started waking up at almost the same time every night. Not always exactly 3:00 a.m., but close enough that the glowing numbers on my alarm clock took on a weird ritual weight. 2:57, 3:02, 3:08. Every time I came out of sleep, like I'd been dunked in cold water, heart racing, mouth dry, the room too quiet. Lying there in the dark, staring at the faint shape of my bedroom door down the short hallway from the bed, I would get the same stupid primal feeling someone was standing just outside it. Not moving, not knocking, just there. Like a presence that had not quite decided whether it was going to try the handle. I told myself it was anxiety, that once you let something like that clip under your skin, your brain will find ways to poke at the bruise when you are most defenseless. I told myself it was all the usual stuff: stress, lack of exercise, too much screen time, a diet that was 60% takeout and 40% guilt. But the sense persisted, night after night. The thought of getting up and checking the door felt worse than staying in bed and pretending there was nothing there. There was a reasonable part of me that knew exactly what the correct response to all of this was. Leave it alone. Change phones again, maybe. Stop backing anything up. Take a hammer to the current one if I had to. Go see a therapist and talk about why I was letting a 15-second video dictate where I drove and when I slept. Put as much distance as humanly possible between me and County Road 19. Instead, the other part started to win, the part that wanted, in a sick, exhausted way, to prove something. It was not bravery. It did not feel noble or cleansing. It felt obsessive. Every time the fridge hummed a little too loud, or the apartment fell into that weird, thick silence for a second, before the furnace kicked on, I thought about the cemetery, about the clip, about how my life had frayed in ways that did not show up on any visible chart, all because of something I refused to look at head on. Somewhere in there, on one of those too late, too quiet nights, I did something I had been avoiding. I messaged Ryan. We had not talked in years beyond the occasional Merry Christmas react to a family photo. His profile picture now was him in a collared shirt, one of his kids on his shoulders, both of them squinting into the sun. He looked older, a little heavier, happier. I stared at the chat box for a long time, the blinking cursor feeling more accusatory than any ghost. Finally, I typed, "Hey man, weird question. Do you remember that night we went to the cemetery off County 19? I almost deleted it. Sent it anyway. He was online apparently. The little scene popped up faster than I expected. A minute later, his reply came through. Yeah, old dumb shit. Why I felt something tighten in my chest. I tried to play it casual, just been thinking about it. And the video. Do you remember what it looked like? Typing dots appeared, then vanished, came back. I remember enough. You still have that thing? I stared at that line a little too long, then answered, yeah. It never really went away. There was a longer pause. When his reply finally came, it was shorter. Dude, we were like 22, trespassing in a graveyard, drunk. Brains do weird stuff when you want to be scared. It was kids freaking themselves out. Some part of me relaxed a fraction. Another part bristled. That's simple, I wrote. He answered quickly this time. I decided to make it that simple. I got a mortgage now. I'm not going to lose sleep over a glitchy video from 10 years ago. Mortgage, kids, a life with real heavy things in it. I realized I had no idea if he woke up at 3 a.m., feeling like something was outside his bedroom door. Maybe he did, and he had just gotten better at ignoring it. I thought about asking him if anything else had happened to him afterward. If he had ever seen her in reflections in dreams, in the spaces between ordinary sounds. Instead, I just sent, yeah, fair. He responded with a thumbs-up emoji, the most normal, boring punctuation to a conversation that had been digging its fingernails into my throat. I closed the chat. I thought about Jake next. We were not even Facebook friends anymore. His profile was a ghost itself, mutuals who knew him, but no easy way in. I had a number buried in my contacts that might still be his, but the last time I had heard his voice outside of that graveyard was years before in a drunk voicemail I had never fully deleted. It had come in at 2-something in the morning on a random Tuesday. My phone had been on silent. I found it the next day hung over on my couch, sunlight too bright through the blinds. His voice had been slurred but clear enough. You know it doesn't stop just because you delete it, right? He'd said. No hello. No let in. You know that man, it doesn't care if it's on your phone or not. There had been a long, wet-sounding exhale, a laugh that did not have any humor in it. Then the voicemail cut off mid-breath. I had never called back. He had never tried again. We just drifted. I thought about digging up that old message, calling whatever number it had come from, asking him point blank what he meant. But my thumb hovered over his name in my contacts and did not move. Fear is not just about what you think you might see. It is also about what you think someone might tell you that you can never unhear. So I did nothing for a while, adjusting my whole life around this thing I refused to resolve. The decision, when it finally came, did not arrive during some dramatic storm or on an anniversary or at 3:00 a.m. It came on a Saturday afternoon in completely normal daylight. I was running errands, dry cleaning, grocery store, oil change, the kind of day that makes you feel like a cardboard cutout of an adult moving between strip malls. My GPS took me along familiar roads. I rolled through intersections I had been through 1,000 times. At some point, instead of taking the exit toward the newer bypass, I stayed on the older route. Habit, maybe, or something else tugging. The landscape started to look recognizable in a way I did not want it to. Fields, breaks in the tree line, that particular long stretch where the road cresting a gentle hill made the horizon feel too low. My stomach tightened before my brain caught up to why. Then I saw it. On the right side of the road, half lost behind overgrown branches and a veil of dead vines, the rusted metal sign. The paint had peeled further. The letters were more faded, barely legible at 45 miles an hour, but the shape of it, the way it leaned just slightly, was the same. The old cemetery. County Road 19. I felt something click in my head. Not like an idea forming, more like a trap closing. I could have kept driving. I should have. Pushed past it, let the sign vanish in the rearview mirror like a bad memory glimpsed too late. Instead, my hands turned the wheel. The car's blinker ticked loudly in the cabin as I slowed, pulled onto the dirt turnout across from the entrance. The same patch of bare ground where Ryan's Civic had sat all those years ago. The surface was rougher now, more ruts from more trucks. Grass had made a half-hearted attempt at reclaiming parts of it and failed. I put the car in park. The engine idled with a faint vibration that traveled up through the seat into my spine. Outside, a light breeze moved through the tall weeds at the edge of the ditch, making them sway and hiss. I did not get out. Not yet. Instead, I reached for my phone. The lock screen lit up Time Battery, a couple of notifications from apps that suddenly felt ridiculous. I unlocked it and opened photos, half convinced I would find nothing unusual. That this was all just a stupid, self-inflicted ritual. The grid appeared. New pictures first, a shot from the grocery store parking lot earlier that day, a photo of a receipt, a blurry picture of my lunch. Then my eyes snagged on the bar at the bottom of the screen. Favorites, it said. There was a red heart icon, a number next to it indicating how many photos and videos I had supposedly marked as special. I hadn't used that feature much. A couple of landscape shots I'd liked. One picture of my niece on a swing. I tapped it, thinking I'd see those and nothing else. The album opened. At the top of the grid, pinned in the first position, bigger than the rest with that little heart icon filled in, was the cemetery clip. I never favorited it. I knew that the way you know if you ever stuck your hand into a fire on purpose. It was not the kind of mistake you can make and forget. Yet there it sat, tagged by the phone's own quiet logic as something I apparently cherished. Something worth highlighting. The car idled. The wind hissed through the weeds. In the distance, a semi rolled along the highway, its rumble a faint, familiar growl. On the screen in my hand, she waited in a thumbnail no bigger than my fingernail, wearing a long, pale gown, standing in a patch of ground that was maybe 50 yards from where I currently sat. For the first time since that night, the question stopped being, why is this happening? And became what happens if I walk back in there again. I left the engine running. 6:2. Daytime at the cemetery. I do not go in the same day I pull into the turnout. I sit there with the engine idling, phone in my hand, that little heart under the thumbnail staring back at me, and I chicken out. I put the car in drive, pull away, and spend the rest of the weekend pretending I do not know exactly how far that cemetery is from my apartment, measured in miles and minutes. But once you have seen something again, really seen it, it is hard to pretend you have not. The image of that sign, half swallowed by branches, sits in the back of my head, like a notification I have not cleared. By Wednesday, I am checking the weather app obsessively. Bright, clear, sunny. The kind of forecast people use as an excuse to go to the park. I use it as an excuse to go back to the dead. I pick a day that could not be more harmless. Blue sky, thin strings of cloud stretched across it like someone pulled cotton apart and forgot to finish the job. The sun is high, white bright, laying everything out in crisp edges. If you were writing the script, you would save this kind of light for commercials about minivans and lawn care. I tell myself that is the point. Horror belongs to nights and storms. Daylight is for disproving things. County Road 19 looks different under the sun. Less like a mouth and more like just another stretch of two-lane holding its place between fields. The turnout is easier to spot. The rust on the metal sign shows its colors deep orange streaking down from the bolts. The painted letters are flaking, but enough of them remain that I can still see the name of the cemetery barely. I pull into the same bare patch of ground, now dry and dusty instead of slick. Kill the engine this time. The sudden silence is punctured by birdsong's sharp little chirps from the trees at the edge of the lot. Somewhere further off, I hear the steady drone of a lawnmower, the sound wobbling as it moves behind a distant house I cannot see. The cemetery itself looks smaller. Without the tunnel vision of headlights and phone flashlights, it is just a shallow rectangle of land, maybe an acre, fenced in on three sides by low iron bars. The fourth side is bordered by the old funeral home, hunched close enough that its shadow spills over the first row of stones. The funeral home has not aged well. Where it used to look merely abandoned, it now looks wounded. The roof has caved in on the left side, creating a jagged mouth where shingles curl up around broken rafters. One of the upstairs windows is completely gone, leaving a jagged frame of wood and glass teeth. A no trespassing sign is still nailed crookedly to the front door, the letters sun-faded and starting to peel. No one is guarding it. No one is fixing it. Some of the stones nearest the fence have fallen completely. They lie flat on the ground or at awkward angles, half swallowed by grass. Here and there, someone has staked a small new flag into the earth beside a grave, bright red, white, and blue against the worn slabs. A couple lean limp, their edges frayed from wind. It is daylight. There is no reason for my skin to crawl. It crawls anyway. The chain across the entrance is still there, looped between the two posts. Back then, it had felt like a barrier, something we were clearly not supposed to cross. Now it hangs looser, its padlock either gone or hidden on the underside. I test it with my hand. It rattles easily, then swings aside enough that I can step through without even lifting my legs. No fence hopping this time. Just me and the chain giving up like it was waiting. Inside, the grass is uneven under my shoes. In some spots, it crunches dried out and stiff. In others, it gives way in soft, damp patches, the ground underneath darker and spongier. Someone has mowed recently enough that it is not a jungle, but they have not been careful. There are spots where the mower blade has taken a chunk out of a stone's base, scars of fresh gray against old weathering. Birds weave their sound through the space. Not singing like a Disney movie, not ominous like a soundtrack, just there. Layered. A couple of crows argue from a tree beyond the fence. That lawnmower hums faintly somewhere off to the left over a ridge out of sight. The wind feels different in the daytime. At night, it had come in fits and starts. Now it moves more steadily, pushing through the line of trees at the back of the cemetery in constant passes. The leaves rasp against each other, a whisper that never quite stops. If I close my eyes, I can almost imagine the sound is coming from mouths instead of branches. I do not close my eyes. I walk slowly toward the far-end phone already in my hand. I am not recording this time, not yet. Instead, I open the clip. My thumb hovers over the play button. For a moment, I consider the insanity of what I am about to do, standing in the same patch of ground in daylight, replaying a moment that never should have existed in the first place. I press play. Turn the volume down to the barest audible murmur. On the screen, the night version of the cemetery blooms into being. grainy monochrome with the flashlight beam swinging. I scrub forward, dragging the progress bar until I reach the moment just before she appears, the last frame, where it is just the tree, the two crooked stones, and that patch of bare dirt. I pause it there. Then I look up. Daylight bleaches out some of the detail, but the shape of it all is the same. The tree is there, the spread of its roots pushing up through the ground on one side. The two stones lean away from each other at their odd angles, one to the left, one to the right, like two people who stopped speaking to each other decades ago. Between them, the ground is thinner, less grass, more exposed earth. The exact patch where on my phone a long white gown had once hovered just above the ground. I turn in a small, slow circle, comparing the frame in my hand to the space around me. I adjust my position by a step, then another. Shift left, then forward, trying to line the real world up with this 15-second ghost of it. I feel stupid. If someone drove by right now, all they would see is a grown man standing alone among old graves, holding his phone up, taking tiny steps back and forth. An influencer with no followers, filming nothing. At the same time, I feel exposed in a way that has nothing to do with strangers in cars. The sky is open above me. The road is a direct line back to town. There is no one else in the cemetery. But the back of my neck itches, that prickling awareness of being observed. Not from the road, not from the fallen down funeral home. From somewhere closer. The sensation of being watched from behind a curtain, thin enough to see through if you get close, thick enough to hide whoever is doing the looking. I swallow the sound too loud in my own head. The wind pushes harder through the trees, raising the whispering to a steady hiss. One of the crows gives up on its argument and takes off wings, beating loud as it rises above the tombstones and veers away. I plant my feet between the two crooked stones. On the phone, paused, my flashlight from years ago shines into the same space. In the clip, the grass looks darker, less healthy. The bare patch of dirt is just a smear of gray. In real life, it is mottled brown with a few stubborn blades poking through. I let my eyes wander over the stones themselves. I never really looked at them closely that night. We were too busy staring at what was in between. The stone to my left is older, the surface more worn. The name is half-eaten by lichen, the dates barely visible. The stone to my right has fared slightly better letters, still legible, some first name I do not know, a last name I could look up if I wanted. Years from sometime in the late 1800s. On the stone to my left, near the middle above where the name should be, something catches the light differently. At first I think it is just a scratch, or a pattern left by rain seeping through over decades. But the more I tilt my head, the more deliberate it looks. It is faint. Whoever did it did not press deep. Thin, hesitant lines carved with something sharper than a fingernail, but not as precise as a proper tool. They crisscross, at first random seeming. Then my brain tilts them the right way, and the pattern falls into place. From the angle where I am standing between the stones facing the tree, the shallow lines resolve into a recognizable shape. A long vertical outline of a body. A suggestion of a head at the top, slightly too small for the length of it. Lines flaring outward near the bottom like fabric spreading. No arms, no face, no details. Just the idea of a woman in a dress scratched into the surface by someone with idle hands and too much time to stand and stare. From any other angle, it would probably look like nothing. From here, in this exact spot, it looks like her. 6.3. Trying to film her again. Standing between those two stones, staring at that faint, scratched outline of a woman in a dress, I realized there was only one thing left I was ever really going to do here. I could have just backed away. I could have walked back to the car and let the whole trip be nothing more than a weird pilgrimage to a place that had already taken enough from me. But the phone in my hand was already warm, already awake, already sitting one tap away from doing the thing it seemed to have been begging me to do since that first night. Record. I backed out of the old clip, thumbed over to the camera app, and switched to video. The screen flipped to the live view of the cemetery, bright and overexposed for a second, before adjusting. The tree appeared, its bark rendered in crisp detail. The stones at its base showed as sharp edges instead of soft, grainy ghosts. My hand was shaking. Not dramatically, not horror movie trembling, but enough that the image wobbled when I held the phone up. I took a breath, tried to steady my wrist, and pressed the red record button. "Okay," I said quietly, more to myself than to any theoretical audience. "Let's see." The first difference from years ago was loud in my head. I was alone. No Jake pacing in frame, waving his arms and trying to crack jokes over his own nerves. No Ryan hanging back near the fence, muttering about how this was stupid, but following anyway. No beer loosened in my bloodstream, no thrill of doing something dumb and dangerous, because that is what you do at 22 when you believe the worst thing that can happen is a ticket. Just me, older and sober in bright daylight. On the screen, the scene was brutally honest. No murk to hide in. The tree was just a tree, rough gray-brown trunk branches spreading overhead. The stones were just stones, stained and pitted, their carved names squinting up at the sun. The grass was a patchwork of green and yellow with bare dirt showing through in scabbed patches. I started a slow pan. Deliberate this time. No shaky ghost hunter narration, no nervous jokes. I moved the phone from left to right in a steady arc, trying to mimic the path my younger self had taken that night. Left nothing but stones and grass. Center the tree, the bare patch of earth between the two crooked markers, the background line of trees swaying slightly in the wind. Right, more stones, the sagging edge of the cemetery fence, the gray side of the collapsed funeral home. That was it. The birds had been a constant chorus when I walked in, small songbirds in the trees, the occasional harsh caw of a crow. As I filmed, I realized they were thinning out one by one, like someone turning down a volume knob slowly. The lawnmower drone, which had been a steady presence on the distant ridge, cut off mid-pass. By the time I finished the first pass, there were only a few scattered chirps and the wind. I did not hear it change immediately. My brain had filed the wind under background years ago, the way you stop hearing the refrigerator until it goes quiet. But something in the weight of the air shifted, and with the phone held up so close to my face, I suddenly felt my ears pop just a tiny pressure, the way they do when you drive over a hill too fast, or an elevator moves between floors. On instinct, I stopped moving the phone. The frame froze on the tree. I held my breath and listened. In my ears, everything sounded normal: wind pushing through leaves, a far-off engine from the road, the rustle of my jacket as my heart tapped against my ribs. In the tiny moment where the pressure in my ears equalized, the world pressed itself flat for a fraction of a second, a kind of micro-hush. I did not notice the audio glitch until later. For now, I kept filming. I did one more slow sweep, then another, each time trying not to flinch in anticipation of seeing a long, white shape simply be there in the middle of the frame. The longer nothing appeared, the more ridiculous I felt. I stopped after a minute or so, hit the red square. The timer froze. The video saved itself with a small, smug little click in the interface. Relief and disappointment washed in at the same time. Part of me had come here hoping for nothing, hoping to walk out with a boring, sun-drenched clip of an empty patch of graves so I could finally point at something and say, "See, it was nothing." We scared my 22-year-old self for no reason, and I let that fear calcify into a story I told myself at 3 a.m. The other part, the part that had dragged me back here despite every sensible instinct, had wanted proof that I was not crazy. Evidence that something was wrong, so I could stop gaslighting myself about all the little ways my life had bent around 15 seconds of bad video. Standing there with the daytime quiet pressing in, the birds cautiously starting up again in the trees, I realized neither part was happy. Okay, I said again, to the stones, to the tree, to the empty air. Okay. I walked back out of the cemetery, the chain clinking softly as I moved it aside. The sun hit the front of me as I stepped onto the road, bright enough that I had to squint. Cars moved past now, and then not many, but enough that the world felt populated again. Back in the car, I shut the door and sat there for a minute without starting the engine. The interior was hotter than outside, the heat trapped under the windshield, making the air thick. The faint smell of old fast food and dashboard cleaner wrapped around me. I pulled the phone out. My fingers left a sweat print on the glass. Part of me did not want to watch the new clip in that parking spot within sight of the fence. Part of me knew that if I waited until I was back home, I would convince myself I had imagined any anomaly, that being here this close would somehow skew what I thought I saw. I opened the gallery. The new video sat at the top of recents, still processing its little thumbnail. After a second, the spinning icon disappeared, and the rectangle resolved into a bright, washed-out view of the tree and stones. No pale gown, no curtain of hair, just daylight. I tapped it. The video expanded. I hit play. The first 30 seconds were exactly what I remembered recording. The camera panned over grass and stones. The birdsong was loud in my headphones, each chirp clear. The wind made a soft, rushing sound in the mic, punctuated by the occasional creak of a branch. My own breathing came through steady, a little shallow. Halfway through, there was that moment where my ears had popped. On the audio, it registered as a half-second of clean silence, not just quiet or blank. The wind vanished. The birds cut off mid-note. Even the subtle hiss of the mic dropped to zero. It was like someone had taken a razor and sliced out a fraction of a second of sound, then stitched the rest back together. On the screen, nothing obvious happened. The picture did not glitch. There was no sudden blur, no artifact. Just the same slow sweep past the tree. Then the audio came crashing back. Birds whined, a car passing on the road behind me. I watched the rest of the clip, heart speeding up for no good reason. Grass, stones, tree, nothing extraordinary. At the end, the camera dipped as I lowered the phone. For a second, the view turned into a close-up of my jacket, the zipper flashing. Then the image bounced once more and landed on the inside of my car. I had forgotten I was still recording when I slid into the driver's seat. The last few seconds of the video were of the dashboard, the steering wheel, the faint reflection of my own face in the dark screen of the center console. See, I said out loud in the recording, though I did not remember talking. The word was small, almost embarrassed. Nothing. I was about to hit pause when something at the very edge of the frame caught my eye. It was in the background, behind the reflected silhouette of my head in the glass of the driver's side window. At first, I thought it was just a trick of light, a smear from the sun hitting the glass, some weird angle of shadow. But as I scrubbed back and forth over those last 2 seconds, it refused to resolve into anything harmless. In the faint, dark mirror of the window, my outline sat in the foreground, the slope of my shoulders, the shape of my head. Behind that, barely there was another shape, paler than the rest of the reflection. Vertical. A hint of something long and white standing behind my shoulder, where in the actual car there had been nothing but empty air and the passenger seat. No features, no clear lines. just the impression of a figure filling the back left portion of the frame. On the very last frame, before the clip ended, the pale smear seemed to narrow slightly, as if turning. In the car present tense, the air around me felt suddenly thicker. My own reflection in the real window looked back at me, eyes wider now, jaw tighter. Behind it in the glass, there was nothing. Just the parking lot, the rusted sign, the road. But on the screen in my hand, that 15-second echo had grown by exactly one new ghost. 7. 1. Writing the story. Right now, as you're reading this, I am sitting in a different apartment than the one I shared with Jake and Ryan, but the layout is similar enough that sometimes I feel like I never moved. Second floor again. Columbus again. A small living room that bleeds into a smaller kitchen. One bedroom down a short, dim hallway. Cheap carpet, beige walls, fixtures that have belonged to at least a dozen other people before me, and will belong to a dozen more after. It is a little after midnight. The TV is off. The only light comes from the lamp behind the couch, and the laptop balanced on my knees. My phone sits face down on the coffee table, black case against fake wood, the charging cable coiled nearby like it is waiting for instructions. The apartment hums the way all apartments do when you live alone long enough to hear the bass track of your life. The fridge in the kitchen is running a steady low vibration that buzzes faintly through the linoleum and into the wall. Every so often, the compressor clicks a little louder, and the hum shifts up half a note like it is straining to keep up. Outside, Broad Street is doing whatever Broad Street always does at night. Most of the traffic has thinned out, but every few minutes a car passes its tires, hissing on the pavement, the sound blunted by the double-pane windows and the thin layer of insulation that separates my rented reality from the air. Sometimes you can tell what kind of vehicle it is, just from the noise, high impatient buzz for a compact, deeper growl for a truck. The thermostat on the wall beside the hallway makes a tiny tick as it decides the temperature has dipped below the number I told it to care about. A few seconds later, the vents exhale a soft rush of warm air that slides along the ceiling and down the walls, brushing the back of my neck, in a way that would be comforting if I did not know how easily those sounds can vanish. I am typing this story into an email addressed to a horror channel. Not tech support, not a therapist, not my mom. A channel where people send in things like the creepiest thing that ever happened to me, and strangers in different states put it on while they wash dishes or drive home in the dark or try to fall asleep. I am not doing it for clout. If this ever gets read aloud, I doubt anyone will use my real name. Maybe they will change a couple of details, the road, the town, the type of car, to make it harder to trace. I am not even sure I want it to make it onto a video. I am doing it because this is the only place I can imagine saying all of it. I have never told this story fully to anyone in my actual life, not to the woman I lived with for 3 years, who thought my reluctance to take couples selfies was just stubbornness. Not to coworkers, even when the conversation drifted toward weird stuff that happened to you as a kid. Not to doctors when they asked about stress or sleep or whether I ever felt like I was being watched when I was alone. Pieces, sure. I have said, yeah, we did some dumb graveyard trespassing in my 20s. I have joked I have this one old video that creeps me out, then changed the subject before anyone could ask to see it. But I have never laid it out in a straight line from the first drive to County Road 19 to the last time I saw something in a reflection that wasn't supposed to be there. Part of that is embarrassment. How do you look someone in the eye at brunch and say, there is a 15-second clip on my phone that has survived factory resets and new operating systems. It has moved across devices I never told to keep it, and sometimes it behaves like it is aware of me. You do not. Part of it is selfishness. For a long time, I have been afraid that the more people look at that clip, the more real it becomes. That every pair of eyes on it is another hook it gets to sink into someone else's life. I have imagined it as a kind of virus that does not care what hardware you give it as long as it has somewhere to live. So there has been this constant tension in me wanting someone to say I see it too. You are not crazy. And wanting no one else to ever look at that frame, to keep her contained inside the smallest possible circle, even if that circle includes me. The keys on the laptop click under my fingers, a soft plastic chatter. The cursor crawls forward line by line. Each time I hit backspace, the sound is just a hair harder, as if I am chewing up something that does not want to be edited. As I type out the night in the cemetery, the years of pretending the returns to the clip, I start to realize how much of my memory has been organized around sound. The hush before she shows up. The way the birds cut out at the same moment my ears pop. The compressors pause. The building's mechanical breath being held. I am halfway through describing the Starbucks glitch, the song skipping a beat, as the clip reappeared on yet another phone, when I notice that the apartment has gotten quieter around me. It is not dramatic at first. The heater shuts off, which it is supposed to do. The vents go still, the air settling into a comfortable, slightly stale blanket. The fridge hums on in the background. I keep typing, clicking keys, shaping sentences, trying to get the timing right, so that you will understand how slowly and how fast all of this felt. Then the fridge noise fades. Not like it normally does with a tidy click and a downshift. It just sinks. The hum drops below the threshold of my hearing in the space of a second. The difference between there and not there is subtle but absolute. The double-pane windows, which usually let in the occasional distant tire noise and the rumble of a late bus, might as well be insulated with concrete. No cars pass. No bass line leaks up from the guy downstairs who likes to play music too loud on weekends. The ticking of the thermostat stops. I do not realize how much that small, regular sound has been marking time until it is gone. Without it, the room feels like it has slipped sideways. Like the present moment has been decoupled from the clock on the wall. My fingers slow on the keys. I sit there hunched over the laptop, watching the cursor blink at the end of a sentence about how I told myself it was just a trick of the light. The glow from the screen turns the rest of the room into a vague, blue-edged outline. The lamp's yellow pool barely reaches the corners. For a second, I entertain the possibility that the power has gone out. That would explain the silence. But the lamp is still on. The laptop is still charged. The router's little green light over on the shelf blinks steadily. The only thing that has fully gone quiet is the building. I become hyper-aware of my own heartbeat, the pulse of it in my throat and fingertips. The soft rasp of my breath sounds too loud in my own ears. I tell myself not to look at the hallway. I look at the hallway. The bedroom door is open, a darker rectangle at the end of the narrow passage. Beyond it, nothing I can see from here. Just black. And in my imagination, the faintest suggestion of a shape standing just outside the frame. I force my eyes back down to the screen. I keep typing. The words feel heavier now, each one an effort to push through the thickening air. I write about opening the clip with headphones, about hearing my name in that ragged breath. I describe the memory the app made without my consent, how it labeled the cemetery night as something to relive. The apartment does not react. It just stays still and quiet in a way it never quite does when I am not writing about this. My phone, still face down on the coffee table, vibrates once. The sound is small but sharp in the hush, a quick insect-like buzz against wood. The kind of thing you might miss if the TV were on, if the heater were running, if the world were doing its normal, messy thing. Right now, it might as well be a gunshot. Every muscle in my back tightens. For a second, I do not move. The vibration stops. No second buzz, no ringtone. Just that one deliberate tap from inside the black rectangle. I reach for it, fingers colder than they should be. Flip it over. The screen wakes up, bathing my hand in pale light. A notification banner slides down from the top. It is from the Photos app. Relive this moment, it asks, friendly and bright. A special memory from October. 7.2. The big screen, the long hush. The notification hovers there on my phone screen longer than it should, soft white against the dim of my apartment. Relive this moment, a special memory from October. I swipe it away, it does not matter. The idea is already in my head, as if the app was just saying aloud something the clip itself has been thinking for a while, one more time. I stare at the laptop screen for a minute, rereading the last line I typed in the email. There is a part of me that wants to hit send right now, to freeze the story where it is and let somebody else own it for a while. Another part refuses. It feels dishonest to describe that video without actually watching it. Not the way I did with headphones hunched over a small screen, but the way we did the first time we blew it up, larger than life on a TV, filling the room, leaving nowhere else to look. One last time, I tell myself. I close the Photos app on my phone, then reopen it immediately, like I am proving I can still make that choice. The clip sits at the top of recents again, the thumbnail a tiny gray slice of the cemetery that has been with me longer than most of my furniture. I tap the share icon, cast to device. The TV in front of me, black and reflective, shows up in the list. I select it. The television wakes with a faint click and a quick flash of its logo, then goes dark again, waiting. The little casting icon flickers in the corner of my phone screen. Around me, the apartment is mostly shadow now. I get up only long enough to switch off the lamp behind the couch. The room falls into that particular kind of night that exists in city apartments. Not pitch black, but a thin wash of ambient glow leaking through blinds from streetlights and neighboring windows. The TV screen becomes the brightest object in the space, a pale rectangle floating on the wall. I sit back down. The laptop on the coffee table shows the half-finished email cursor blinking patiently at the end of a sentence about the way silence feels when it is wrong. I angle the screen down a little so the light from it does not compete with the TV. I hit play on my phone. Set it down face up now next to the laptop. The TV responds a moment later. The cemetery appears stretched wide and tall, the 4:3 video boxed in by black bars on either side. On the big screen, the grain is almost its own weather. It rolls subtly over everything, a fine storm of digital noise that never quite settles. The tree at the far end of the frame is a dark, crooked pillar. The stones around it are hunched, indistinct shapes. The audio comes through the TV's speakers, thin but clear. My younger voice mutters something off camera, some stupid, half-joking line about ghosts paying rent, delivered in a tone that makes me want to reach through time and slap myself. My breathing is louder than I remember, a soft, nervous rasp. For a moment, it feels like a rerun, a recording of a recording. I know exactly what is going to happen next. That knowledge feels like armor. Then she appears, and the armor drops. On the TV, her figure blooms into existence near the tree, that long, pale shape that does not belong in a place built for short, solid blocks of stone. The gown smears at the edges, the compression struggling, but the overall silhouette is unmistakable, vertical, still arms held close to her sides. Hair hanging forward in a curtain that eats light rather than reflecting it. At the exact moment she resolves fully in the frame, the sound in my apartment thins. It is not dramatic. There is no thunderclap, no lights flickering. It is more like someone laying a blanket over the world, pressing down on the tiny gaps where noise leaks through. The fridge compressor, which I had not even realized was running, winds down in the space of a breath. No friendly little click, no gradual fade, just there and then not. No pipes creak. No distant toilet flushes in another unit. No neighbor's TV leaks through the wall on either side. Out on Broad, the occasional whoosh of passing cars stops entirely. There are no tires on wet pavement, no distant honk, no muffled bass line from somebody rolling through with music too loud. Even the faint electric buzz of the TV itself seems to dampen, as if the act of playing this particular clip has settled over it like dust. The only sound left is the video. Its audio suddenly feels too loud in the hush. My own recorded footsteps hit harder through the speakers, each crunch on grass landing in the air of my living room like a misplaced step. The breath, the extra one, slides in under it, all low and hungry. Physically, I feel the silence more than I hear it. There is a faint pressure behind my ears, the same feeling you get when an airplane begins to descend and the cabin has not quite equalized yet. My ears ring just a little, a high, thin tone that could be in my head or in the room or threaded between the two. I become acutely aware of the weight of my own body on the couch. The cushion dips under me in a way I have never noticed, a slow surrender of foam to gravity and time. My heart thuds against my ribs, each beat a small, hard tap I can feel in the tips of my fingers, where they rest, laced together in my lap. On the screen, my younger self stops moving the camera. The frame steadies on her. She begins to lift her head. The motion is the same as it has always been wrong. Not smooth, not natural. It happens in little lurches, like someone dragging a file across a glitchy timeline. Chin rising by degrees, hair shifting in clumps, the impression of a face gradually emerging from behind the strands. Watching it as an adult, now older and less convinced that everything can be explained, I see more in the way she moves than I did then. I see the slight jerkiness that does not match the rest of the video, like she is operating on a different frame rate than the world around her. The way the shadows around her seem to darken as she lifts her head, not because the light changes, but because the camera cannot quite decide how to expose for her presence. And I see something else. It hits me slowly, like a delayed realization. At first, I think her gaze is simply off. All these years I have told myself she is looking at whoever holds the camera. Straight at that 22-year-old idiot standing in the dark, phone clenched in sweaty hands. But the angle is wrong. Her face, what can be seen of it, is not aligned with where the original camera would be, not quite. The dark ovals where eyes might live do not line up with the center of the frame. They are skewed just a few degrees, enough to register now that I am watching it with the kind of attention I have been avoiding for a decade. If you trace the line of her head tilt the way her hair falls the direction of those hollow spots, it does not point at the younger me in that graveyard. It points slightly past him, past the lens, past the recorded moment, outward, toward the space where the screen is now, toward the couch, toward me. In the instant that realization lands, something taps the glass of my living room window. A small, sharp sound perfectly placed in the silent air. Not a branch dragging, not the random settling of a frame. It is too precise for that. One tap, like a fingernail or a ring. The kind of polite singular knock someone gives when they are already looking at you through the glass and do not feel the need to announce themselves more than once. On the TV, her head finishes its last jerk and comes fully upright. The dark, blurred suggestion of a face now pointed straight through the camera and into my living room. 7:3, the cold ending. I do not get up. That is the first thing I remember clearly after the tap on the glass. Not the exact tone of it, not the way the sound seemed to land against my skin, but the fact that I stayed exactly where I was. Every instinct you see in movies charging to the window, throwing open the blinds, yelling into the night, never even makes it to my muscles. I sit on the couch with my hands pressed into my knees, staring at the TV. On the screen, the clip finishes like it always does. A few more seconds of shaky movement, my younger voice cursing under his breath, the frame tilting down toward the ground. Then black and the playback bar sliding neatly to the end. The casting icon in the corner glows for another half second before the TV drops back to the paused thumbnail, a frozen, grainy image of the cemetery tree and stones and static. I half expect the silence to keep deepening, to stretch out until something breaks. Instead, the world starts to climb back in. The fridge in the kitchen kicks on with a rough, almost offended clunk, like it is making up for lost time. The hum swells a familiar low vibration that suddenly feels too loud. Somewhere outside, a siren winds up distant and thin. It rises, holds, then falls away, as whatever emergency it is attached to moves on down broad. The sound leaves a faint ache behind it, the way loud noises sometimes do. The building's heating system coughs once a hollow metallic thunk somewhere in the walls, and then the vents sigh back to life. Warm air creeps along the ceiling again, that barely there whisper of movement returning like a tide. The spell, if that is what it was, loosens. The TV still shows the thumbnail. The laptop on the table still holds the email draft cursor blinking. The phone on the coffee table sits face down, a slab of glass and plastic that weighs a lot more in my mind than it does in my hand. I realize my fingers have gone numb from how hard I was pressing them into my knees. I flex them slowly, listening to the tiny crackle of my own joints. Eventually, I reach for the phone. My hand shakes a little. I tell myself it is just adrenaline, the aftermath of a jump scare stretched out into real time. The tips of my fingers drag over the smooth edge of the device before I hook it and flip it over. The lock screen lights up, time a couple of meaningless notifications, battery percentage. Nothing dramatic. No missed calls from no caller ID. No urgent alerts. I swipe up, unlock, and open photos, because at this point, that is the only honest thing left to do. The clip is there. Of course it is. It sits at the top of recent's, same thumbnail, same 15-second length. Underneath it, a little line of gray text reads, "Watched less than a minute ago." I tap into it, then back out like I am just proving I still can. As I do, I notice something I have either never seen before or never allowed myself to register. Under the thumbnail below the basic info, there is a small, subtle prompt, an icon of two overlapping rectangles with an arrow. Text beside it. Suggested share, send this to friends. The casual language makes something in me twist. The idea that the system, the code running under my thumbs, has decided this particular clip is the kind of thing people usually want to forward, to spread, to show around. I do not tap it. Instead, I swipe up on the clip and hit details. This is where the metadata lives. I have been here before on other photos, checking dates, locations, little maps of where I took a picture of a sunset or a plate of wings. Numbers and tags. Harmless. For a second, that is what I see. Created October year. Timestamp from that first night. Location coordinates matching the cemetery off County Road 19. File size resolution. All the same entries that have been haunting me for years. Then my eyes land on a line that was not there the last time I checked, or maybe I just never had the courage to scroll far enough. People 1 face detected. Next to it is a tiny circular thumbnail, not the whole frame, just a zoomed-in portion. The algorithm has decided contains a human face. It is blurred, abstracted into a mess of gray and off-white shapes with darker smudges where eyes and a mouth might be. If you squint, it looks like someone peering through frosted glass. The system, in its cheerful, neutral way, is trying to categorize her. Not as an error or a glitch or an artifact, as a person. Like she is just another friend at a party, another co-worker in a group shot another family member at Thanksgiving. Someone I might want to name tag associate with other moments. Someone who belongs in the people section of my life. I feel suddenly irrationally offended on behalf of every actual person whose face is in my photo library. I close details. Close photos. Watch the home screen snap back into place like nothing happened. The laptop's cursor is still blinking at the end of the email. The subject line reads something vague, story submission. The body is thousands of words of me trying to explain why a 15-second clip feels like a problem I have never solved. My hands hover over the keyboard. This is the decision point, or at least it feels like one. If I send this, I am making it real in a different way. Up until now, the haunting has been mostly private, contained inside my phone, inside my head, inside the narrow band of my life that arcs between apartment, office, grocery store, and back again. Sending it out means inviting more eyes, more attention. It means converting what has for a decade lived as my quiet problem into something narrated by a stranger's voice over stock footage and background music. Part of me recoils at that. Another part, the one that is tired of waking up at 3:00 a.m., feeling like there is something on the other side of my door, thinks maybe that is the only way to push back. To spread the weight around. To say, here, you hold this for a while. I do not know which part of me wins. I just know that at some point after staring at the screen long enough that the words start to blur, my index finger moves on its own. I move the cursor up to the send button. Click. The email window shudders once, then shrinks and vanishes. A small notification pops up briefly, message sent, and disappears. Immediately, the apartment dips. It is subtle and total, like stepping into a pool that is perfectly still. For exactly one breath, everything goes quiet again. The fridge in mid-hum cuts off in the middle of a vibration. The heater pauses mid-cycle. The distant city noise outside is sheared away, leaving only the hollow pressing sound of my own lungs pulling air in and pushing it back out. I can feel the silence squeezing in on my eardrums, not painful, but present. The kind of silence that makes you think you can hear the electricity in the walls. In that breath, my phone screen lights up. I do not touch it. It just wakes as if notified. The lock screen flashes by in less than a heartbeat, and the camera app opens on its own. Front-facing. The TV in front of me is off now, black glass reflecting the dim outline of the room. On the phone screen, I can see that reflection again, flattened and slightly distorted by the lens. The app is not just open, it is recording. The little red timer starts ticking up from 0001 in the corner. It captures the dark room, the vague shape of me sitting on the couch, hunched over, staring at a different screen. The soft, ambient glow from the laptop painting my face in sickly blue. Behind me, in the reflection of the TV, I can see the suggestion of the hallway, the doorway to the bedroom, the barely there contrast of furniture against the wall. And just over my shoulder in that reflected rectangle there is something. I do not see it clearly. I cannot. The angle is bad. The light is low, and my eyes are not on the phone, they are on the TV, on the blank glass, that to my naked sight shows nothing but my own outline and the vague shapes of the room. But on the phone screen, in that tiny live view, there is a faint vertical smear of white standing behind me. Too tall to be a lamp, too solid to be a trick of the blinds. The rough suggestion of a long shape in a place where in my actual living room there is only air. The red timer hits 0005, 06. Then the fridge kicks back on with a grunt. The heater exhales. A car passes outside, tire noise rushing back into my world. The silence fractures. The camera app drops back to the lock screen, then goes dark. I pick up the phone eventually. My thumb hovers over the screen, over the icon that will take me into photos, into recents, into whatever new thing has been added to the grid. I do not tap it. I know without having to look that there is a fresh video sitting in my camera roll now. It will be 15 or 20 seconds long. It will be time-stamped with the exact minute I sent this story to you. Its thumbnail will probably show my living room in the dark, or the vague reflection of the TV, or the blurred outline of someone who looks like me sitting on a couch unaware. Maybe if I open it, I will see nothing unusual. Maybe the smear of white will resolve into something harmless, a trick of light, a misread shadow. Maybe it will be worse. That is the thing I am leaving on the table. I do not have the courage to watch whatever that new video captured. It is sitting in my camera roll, tagged with place and time, and if the system has its way, faces. And if you are hearing this, it means I still have not opened it.